damn it. If her grandmother had heard such a foul expression from her pupil's lips, she would have deprived her of sweets for a week and made her wash her mouth out with soap and water. But as the grandmother was fast asleep at the late midnight hour, Juliana remained unpunished. At last, having stopped pacing her room like a caged animal in a zoo, the young girl plumped down on the bed, which squeaked pitifully with the shell netting, raked the teddy bear into a pile, and burying herself in its worn chocolate-colored fur, silently wept. How? Well, how could she be such a fool, fall so low? However, Juliana's brain obligingly told her there was still time before the immediate fall, 21 hours and 30 minutes. The exact time was told to her by the dial of the alarm clock, on which she cast a tear-fogged glance. It was in that time frame that she was to report to the hideous, impossible, heartless wretch in order to. It all happened 10 days ago. Julian was in the school library where she had just returned the books she had read and had volunteered to help the old librarian, who was suffering from sciatica from the rainy weather and was shelving them herself. "You can't reach it, little one," came a mocking voice over her shoulder, and the schoolgirl shrieked and turned around abruptly. Scared her? Because of the height difference, she jammed her nose into the voice owner's chest at armpit level. "No," she answered sharply, and gritting her teeth, she looked up, glaring boldly and contemptuously. Alfred, the terror of the whole school, a bully and just the embodiment of all male vices. The distance between the shelves left no room for maneuvering, but Juliana still twisted, turned, sliding her side involuntarily on his thigh, and stood on tiptoe, reached up a little more, and the book about the lives of the greatest ancient Greek philosophers would be in place. She decided that she would just ignore Alfred, shit on him, not this pleasure. Grandmother, by the way, even in her mind forbade swearing, but her granddaughter allowed herself to do it in her mind. Because life was such that sometimes got through on emotions and nothing could not be done about it. Julian repeated to herself that she didn't care, that he continued to stand behind her, probably squinting mockingly at her blue eyes, so piercing that he seemed to see right through you. There was a rustling sound as Alfred scratched the blonde back of his head. What an unseemly habit. And then he suddenly snatched the book from her, yanked it out of her hand, and slid it back onto the shelf himself. "I didn't ask." She choked on air before she could finish, because he immediately grabbed her shoulders and turned her around to face him, literally slamming her back into the shelving unit. "We need to talk. I have nothing to say to you." Julian raised her voice, and then, remembering where she was, switched to a whisper. "I don't want to talk to you." "Is that so? After all you've done?" He lowered his tone too, as if to tease me. "By the way, you've caused me so much damage. You called everyone up to the director. Losses. Who would even think of trading test answers?" "Businessman," hummed Alfred. "You're a dishonest man, you're a liar, you're a..." "You tell me you're not a gentleman." His hand suddenly moved from the girl's rounded shoulder to her thin, tall neck. Her fingers ran along the edge of the white starched collar of her uniform dress, as if groping, outlining the contour of her collarbones. "What is it about you, huh? You dress like a grandmother and act like one. What are you doing?" The girl whispered. Her voice was quiet, barely audible, no longer out of habit of following the library rules, but because of the strange numbness spreading through her body from where Alfred touched. "Yes, so," he grinned, but with just his lips his eyes were cold. There was nothing to do. He pulled away, took a step to the side, and so some distance finally appeared between them. The obsession was over. Nothing to do? Julian gasped for air. Alfred stood with his hands in the pockets of his jeans, on top of a t-shirt with some soccer club symbols and a black jacket, obviously a size or two larger than necessary. Despite his tall height of almost 190 centimeters, the guy was not very broad in the shoulders and was terribly complex about it, but kept it, of course, in secret. Alfred was the storm of the school, elusive, and at the same time a well-known bully for the whole neighborhood. Well, for his half of it, exactly. And he was also a repeater with a long history of delay in the 3rd, 6th, and 8th grades. It was hard to understand what was the terrible truth about him and what was a terrible rumor, but in any case it would be hard to find a person more opposite in terms of qualities and features noticeable at first sight compared to Juliana. She, like him, turned 18 this spring, at the very beginning of the season, when the first drop appeared from the roofs. But if Alfred looked 20, Juliana, much younger than her age, the principal, the canteen girl, and some other people admired it, loved to compare how different the schoolgirl looked from her peers. That was different and in general lived right, took care of Juliana, Leslie's grandmother, who for 10 years has also been her guardian after the death of her parents, who died in a car accident and the only one of her kindred person in the world. Two people who belonged to very different eras lived in a 3-room apartment Stalinka. In her working past, Leslie taught history and literature, almost 30 years lived in the far north. Her pension was decent, she had enough to live on. However, an outside observer might decide that the life of grandmother and her granddaughter was peculiar. Juliana received an exceptionally strict domestic upbringing. Grandmother had no doubt that the modern world could not be trusted with a child. Grind young, stupid creature, destroy the soul, morality, cripple the future. Leslie herself kept herself apart, socialized only with a few, worthy in her opinion people about her age. And if there was anyone who had the audacity to say that she was treating the child somehow wrong, that person received such an angry, logically structured, and reasoned response that he himself was guilty of everything. And in general, shame on his head. And in time, the neighbors got used to it. After all, every family has its own rules. Everyone knows that. And since Leslie's pupil was cleanly dressed and frozen in winter, was always well-fed, well-behaved, since Leslie herself had an impeccable reputation for the last 50 years. Then in time, everyone calmed down and even began to envy a little. After all, Leslie brought up her granddaughter so that just a gold, not a girl, not at all like modern children, the joy of the family, just a little good-natured lady, not a girl. Until the 5th grade, Juliana was homeschooled and then still went to school. And she was the black sheep. Her teachers praised her for her diligence and intelligence. They gave her A's. Once only got a C for an essay on how I spent my summer. In it, a 6th grader described how she had spent the whole summer reading works on world economy and the history of capitalism. The teacher said that it was very informative, but I would like to know about her personal, so to speak, life, impressions, adventures. Was it really just books all summer? Juliana answered boldly that her grandmother had a friend, Alexander Schwartz, who was 90 years old on his birthday and had written books on the history of capitalism. That's why it was necessary to read them all, and then, according to the results, so to speak, write a poem and read it to the Jubilee. Everything else is selfishness and vanity against the background of such an important matter. If Juliana had said this one-on-one, the teacher might not have gotten angry, but the confrontation happened in front of the whole class. The class fell down from laughter and the teacher gave her a C. Because of this C, the girl became ill. Such a hysteria happened, which ended with fainting, that an ambulance had to be called. Naturally, the teacher replaced the C with a B, for goodness sake. But Juliana still long walked in sadness and told everyone that she was a talentless and a failure, since her essay was evaluated only on some pathetic 3. However, Juliana stood out not only the specifics of this study. She dressed very original. The closet of the pupil, of course, was occupied by her grandmother and consisted of things good, new, but only sewed on the fashion of the 30s of the last century. And that they were not the most fashionable, dressy styles of that era. The shoes were also the most modest, flat shoes, not stained. Her classmates were growing up, becoming teenagers, young girls. They were learning to use makeup, getting manicures, coloring their hair. Julian couldn't afford any of that. Not that she didn't want to. Sometimes she thought her grandmother was too strict. But then she remembered that Leslie had a weak heart, and that in the modern world, life was not so easy because of such loose morals, and any rudiments of rebellious sentiments withered like wheat without water in the hot summer. However, Juliana was not one of those bad girls who can be transformed only by a beauty salon. By adulthood, the girl's figure had become feminine, soft, and lush, in the right places, outlines. She had a slightly elongated face with high cheekbones, a straight nose, and a wide, sensual mouth. Gray eyes were framed by black, fluffy lashes. Her long brown hair was never seen in anything but one of three hairstyles: two braids on each side, one braid in the back, or one braid arranged in a wreath around her head. Add to this refined manners, shyness, modesty, and the habit of keeping in the shadow of everything bright, noisy, provocative, modern, and also the fact that almost all her interests and daily activities were filtered through her grandmother's opinion on whether it was worthy, whether it was decent. If some meticulous outsider were to analyze Juliana like a strange exotic animal, he would easily find the reasons why people around her perceived her as a strange person. And that was putting it mildly, and only in exceptional cases, such as in clashes with Alfred, who for the last 2 years had increasingly made her the object of his attacks, light but offensively barbed. Only in rare cases, Julian's usual calmness would come off and she would begin. Not that she would be rude, never, but to answer sharply and defend herself vigorously. "So you have nothing to do," Julian repeated. "Well, go and study, you idiot. Or help out. Someone broke a window in class 3. It's blowing. There are kids there. You need to." "Wow, you're quick." Alfred smiled as usual. "No, you're acting like a grandmother and thinking the same way. You know what? I've sorted out my problems. I won't be expelled. Thanks to Maria Ivanovna, our class teacher. She covered for me. She, understands, if you give her a hand." "What?" "Yes, Maria. She has 4 children. She's a kind-hearted, fair-minded person. You don't believe me? You want to bet? She's gonna give John an A on the test because his daddy brought her candy and stuff." John was an incorrigible loser, and no one in the class doubted that he would fail the math final. Julian had heard of bets, or rather, she had read about them. In some books, normal people made them, and usually it didn't end well. There was no way she was going to take some stupid bet. But today was not the right day at all. First, the grandmother thought her granddaughter had splashed herself in the morning. The girl swore she never went near her grandmother's dressing table, but she made her go to the bathroom to clean herself up anyway. Then it turned out that the grandmother just thought that in the closet there was a moth, so she put perfume and sprayed there. That's why Julian's clothes smelled. The grandmother didn't apologize, and Juliana felt unjustly offended. Then before school, she ran to the store to get tights. It was not a boutique, but a very modest store of youth clothes, and it was here that she and her grandmother sometimes came when they needed to buy Juliana something that Leslie could not sew. Usually it was something from outerwear. This time, one of the sales girls did not just watch from a distance as usual, but approached Juliana. The girl thought that she probably did that because she didn't have her grandmother with her now, or she wouldn't have dared to approach. Her grandmother couldn't stand all those consultants and knew how to chase them away. The saleswoman started talking about new youth clothes, very stylish denim skirts and beautiful sweaters. Julian glanced at this and turned away. No, even if she herself had been wearing what her grandmother sewed for 2 years now, there was no way she was going to upset her and dress differently. "I feel sorry for the girl," sighed behind her back, sharing with a colleague. "What a wild thing to say. How will she, poor thing, live when grandma is gone? Will be lost with such an attitude. She's not adapted to life at all. No, she'll be left without an apartment or lured into a cult. And where do the neighbors and teachers look, eh?" It was hard, painful to hear that. And at the same time, Juliana couldn't help but admit that this woman, Caroline, saw the name on the counselor's name tag. She was right about something. Juliana was really scared to think about the time when she would be alone. Grandma had been talking a lot lately about her grandfather taking her to heaven soon, and she, Juliana, if she misbehaved, she would end her days on the pavement. So, to prevent that from happening, she would have to study hard, protect herself, and be a man of honor. "What's the bet?" Julian blurted out before she could even think about what she was doing. "That's a different conversation." Halford's voice had a purr in it. "If you're right and John fails, I'll pay back the money I won from Toby." Julian nodded. That would be very good. That would be great, because Toby was a 3rd grader from a large family, and he'd lost everything he'd saved from his pocket money for 6 months. "And I'll also sign up for these, what's their name? Volunteers. And I'm gonna go to the city park and plant trees. And I'm not gonna swear. Okay. Yes, I agree. Wait, he suddenly grabbed her wrist. You didn't even ask what you know if you lost. What do you want? She opened her eyes. Her wrist burned. It wasn't the pain of the grip that was barely perceptible. It was some other strange perception of his closeness. You agreed to the bet, right? But I did. You know, I don't follow you much. It's too much. But I remember you were talking in literature class about keeping your word. Something about honor was there. It was. The girl exhaled and tensed, preparing to wrench her arm free. Which means you'll keep your word. And if you lose, you come where I tell you to come and spend the night with me. Why? Julian squeaked. Theoretically, the guy was very clear. Only in the brain as an automatic system went off from the logical deciphering of this phrase, to spend the night. Why should we come to your place for the night? Well, don't play dumb. You understand everything, he said simply. And then he let her go, winked, and disappeared as if he vanished among the shelves. Julian stood there, barely breathing, staring blankly at herself. Oh no, what was going to happen to her now? How could she? How dare he? The girl swallowed hard. Had Alfred not had enough of the atrocities he was doing? Why would he do this to her? Why? There you are, the librarian appeared in the aisle. After she had instructed the polite girl to arrange the books, she took time out to have some tea. Oh, why are you so pale? Did you put all the books away? What's new on your list? Yes, that's it, Julian replied, her thoughts wandering far away from the library. Thank you, there's nothing. And she left. Much to the amazement of the old librarian, she didn't even say goodbye. And then the day of the test came. John was sitting next to Julianne, and she realized, peeking carefully, that he had no solutions to the problems, but a lot of nonsense. Finally, everyone handed in their notebooks. Julian cast a triumphant glance at Alfred, who was sitting on the kamkaka. She had no doubt that everything would be as it should be. That justice would prevail, that he would lose, that he would be shamed, and that he would be forced to take the path of correction. He might have promised everything just to annoy her, but in the end it would all have a positive effect on him, of course. And then, it became known that John had gotten a 5. Alfred found her, or rather caught her, just outside the school gates, just growing in front of her so that she crashed into him again. Hi. Hi, the girl replied and lowered her head. Well, 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 why are we so sad? Does it feel bad to lose? But it had to happen sometime. You can't live your whole life so right, so perfect. You're judging me? I tried to go around, but he wouldn't let me. Okay, let's not get into any of your ideas, okay? We had a bet. Now you have to do what we agreed to do. You know, this is kind of fun. If it were anyone else, I'm sure the other girl would have sent the bet in me far away. But you're not like that, are you? You gave your word. So, here you go. He held out some paper. My father had a summer house in the suburbs. There's no one there now. Come Saturday night. Hey, you're not going to cry, are you? Don't worry, I won't bite. We'll have a great time. I'll treat you to kebabs. The doctor said it looked like a heart attack was imminent and hospitalization was necessary. Julian fumbled around, gathering the things she would need at the hospital according to her grandmother's instructions. Leslie was taken away. Julian returned to the apartment, locked the front door, sank down on the banquette in the hallway and covered her face with her hands and sobbed. What a nightmare everything was turning out to be. Just a black streak. And at the same time, it was impossible not to recognize that this misfortune allows her to carry out her plans, because her grandmother will be in the hospital for a few days. And therefore, the fact that her granddaughter did not spend the night at home will not become known to her. Frivolous books, erotic movies, such in the cultural and educational menu, compiled by her grandmother for Juliana was not. Naturally, the young girl had some knowledge about the relationship between the sexes, and the school program introduced to the fact that children are not found in cabbage, and yet, the girl understood that if she thought about what she was going to do a little more, she would simply lose her feelings. Theoretically, in this, of course, there was a plus: the date would be canceled. But the downside was she would essentially be betraying her habit of being an honest person. Today you lied about finishing the cutlets and threw them away. Her grandmother had once reprimanded her, and for some reason that incident was particularly sharp in Juliana's memory. And tomorrow, her grandmother narrowed her eyebrows and slapped the missing cutlets in front of her. You'll go stealing or run over a man with a car at a green light. Grandma, please forgive me, little Julian asked, choking back tears. You're not going to make me finish them, are you? They were in the garbage pail. Leslie stroked the girl's head and then grabbed her ear, pulling her away from the table. Take them out and give them to the stray cats that live in the basement. Stick your hands straight up and throw them down. Grandma, the girl even stopped crying out of fear. We don't have cats under the house, only rats. There are rats there. I don't want to. It's too late, sweetheart. The old woman grinned. You have to take responsibility for your actions. Go. And if the rats bite your fingers, she touched each of the 5 fingers on her granddaughter's left hand. It'll be your own fault. I, my dear, ready to love you in every way, even if you were crooked on your face, even if you study for DS. But if I find out that you're lying, if I find out that you don't keep your word, if you ever lie to me like this again, you'll drive me into a coffin with this, and you won't have a grandmother anymore. You'll go to an orphanage to live. Do you understand? After that, 10-year-old Juliana realized that she would always, all her life be an honest person, and she would not break her word. To go and give herself into the hands of the monster in human form, Juliana chose her weekend dress, the most elegant dress, snow-white Richelieu fabric, sun skirt, and wing sleeves. Her hair was bound with a dark green ribbon. She decided not to think about what would happen. Until it happened, she decided to take it one step at a time. Gather herself and make sure all appliances were turned off. Leave the apartment and the house. At the bus stop, take a bus to the station where the commuter trains leave from. Get off the light version of the train, and she was a little confused, but she was told the way was to walk across a field. It was not terrible. There were more people walking there, some cheerful company of granny's gardeners. They were singing songs. A young, strong voice suddenly broke into their elderly chorus. The grandmothers marveled at the unusual companion, who, so young, knew the words of the old hymn, but immediately sang again, and so the whole company reached the dacha community. It was separated from a small village with a funny name of Jishiki by a field where in the old days huge herds of cows grazed, and now rare livestock kept by the locals. A little farther south, the village and the dacha estates were surrounded by a river that dried up to the bottom during the hot summer months. Julianne opened her mouth to say that she couldn't come anywhere, because how could she possibly explain her grandmother's absence at night? She didn't even have any friends she could, theoretically, stay overnight, but she didn't say anything. Alfred left the school with a double feeling. On the one hand, he had managed to achieve something that seemed unreal, but on the other hand, he felt as if he had soiled himself in something nasty, dirty. Juliana was different from the other girls, and for more than a year she had been only an object of interested, mocking observation. But then, he began to notice things that others didn't. How good she was, always a straight back, proud, but not haughty, but a sort of, here, the right word for it is aristocratic head planting. This girl never gossiped about others, never brought cheat sheets. It was clear she didn't live an easy life, but no one heard her complain. It seemed that she existed in her own closed, like a soap bubble, world. At recess, she would duck into a book and go deaf. Then one day, she suddenly noticed Alfred was in a bad mood and threw something like, "Don't take offense, she wouldn't understand." This phrase referred to the conversation Alfred had had with his geography teacher for about 10 minutes, who had reprimanded him harshly, and with a switch to personalities for not having done his homework and didn't want to hear about the fact that there was no time for it, because Alfred's apartment was being renovated and he couldn't refuse to help. She always scolded her students harshly for everything after her husband got his paycheck, because, as rumor had it, the lion's share of that salary he took to his mistress, so she found someone to take her anger out on. It was Julian's statement that caught Alfred's eye. He didn't ask for pity, and no one dared tell him what to think or feel. He tried to hurt Julianne with taunts, but it was all in vain. He began to observe her more, and he didn't realize how it turned into an obsession. Yes, that word seemed quite right to him, and Alfred didn't want to do anything about it. Why should he? After all, she, in all likelihood, like many other people, already had a certain idea of him. so why disappoint her? And even if he had no chance of gaining her favor in kind, well, so be it. But he would get what he wanted. Julian was greeted by the familiar, adoring smells of her grandmother's late lunch of chicken noodle soup and blueberry puff pastries. But before she sat down at the table, at the very threshold, grandmother asked Juliana what grade her test had gotten at school. Only when she was satisfied with the answer did she tell her to take off her shoes and wash her hands. Then they sat down to watch TV, and some old movie about the Musketeers was on. Then Grandma, though it was already 8 o'clock in the evening, took out the crystal from the cupboard, though she hadn't had time to wash it in the morning, so she had to wash it in the evening, she said, handing her pupil an apron, without which no housework could be done. Then Leslie went to bed. Julian was left to herself. The hands on the dial were approaching midnight, inexorably approaching the coming of Saturday. The girl convulsively sucked in air, leaned back on the bed, closed her eyes. What should she do? Break her word? She could, of course. It was unlikely that for such dishonorable behavior she would be immediately hit by karma, a boomerang. That is, a deserved retribution from fate, which her grandmother was so fond of talking about. And anyway, Julianne somehow couldn't imagine how she would exist after. Not to mention that this very thing, the very thing she had signed up for. Julianne sat up abruptly on the bed, then paced the room. Then a "damn it" came from her lips. Julianne was more and more inclined to tell her grandmother, and let her scold, let her punish. But then she would have the opportunity to think of two minds, how to be now. Grandmother would not leave her, would comfort her and say that, of course, there could be only a negative answer. Granddaughter, came the voice of an old woman in the hallway. The girl shuddered. Why isn't Granny asleep? She can't read minds, I think. Granddaughter, Leslie repeated in a hoarse, weak voice. I have a heart attack. Call an ambulance. Who are you here to see, honey? One of the old ladies asked. Just here. Julian frowned. Some acquaintances asked me to drop something off. She waved her hand in the direction, toward the woods, not the houses. Well, good luck to you, replied the old woman, realizing that the girl did not want to talk about herself. All right. Alfred's cottage was really near the forest and stood at the very edge of the community, and it looked abandoned. Julian shuddered at his choice of a place for a date. She knew he didn't live alone and was being raised by a distant relative after Alfred's father had been imprisoned for theft a few years ago. Julian also knew that the boy's father had passed away last year. She had sympathized with him then and even tried to get close to him, to comfort him. Maybe he had misunderstood her attention then, had made up something for himself. By evening it was noticeably colder, and the girl chose her clothes according to the weather, which was still sunny and warm. But now it didn't seem to matter at all that her body was shivering. What was frightening was something else. Finally, Julian found herself on the porch and knocked on the door. Hi, he said, and a look of amazement flashed across his face as if he was sure she wasn't coming. Hi, she said, thinking that awkward mutual greetings like this were becoming a habit. Julian didn't want to make any habits with this guy. Come on in, he stepped aside, letting me into the house. The girl froze, hesitated, as if something nightmarish was waiting for her beyond the threshold. However, in fact, it was so. Inside, the house turned out to be as she had expected it to be, in need of repair and general cleaning. The furniture had been brought in on a what-not-to-spare basis, and the floors were painted a luscious orange. Julian remembered that the same floors had been in her grandmother's house in the country. She had been there only a few times, and then she had sold it because she didn't have the energy to travel to keep everything in order, and it was too far away to use it as a summer house. But the main reason for getting rid of the family nest was that she needed money for her, Juliana, nurturing. This word nurturing, grandmother used, by the way, when she wanted to reproach her granddaughter. They say, I spend so much effort raising you and you still manage to catch a cold in winter, tear a new dress on a walk, refuse to drink fish oil for immunity, do not put away toys, lisp. The list of reasons for reproach was endless. And only when Juliana grew up, or rather when she was 15, she began to think that she was not to blame for everything and everything. Just sometimes, Grandma needed a fight, and the person to do it with at will was just her kindergartner. So, Do you want a drink? Alfred threw awkwardly, escorting the girl deep into the house. I don't drink, she said, glancing at him warily. I already know. I'm asking about the tea. No. Coffee? No, I'm not after that. And you? We can. She clenched her hands so white her knuckles turned white. I know I lost the bet, and I'll keep my word. I'm ready, but can't you? Hurry up. She threw the last words at him angrily, resolutely crossing the distance between them. She stood close again, and he could almost feel her breath. Now Alfred looked dumbfounded. I know I have a reputation, but why are you attacking me like? Courtesans used to be called courtesans, didn't they? Yes. There, you see. Turns out we can speak the same language, he smirked. Okay, that was an unfortunate comparison. I'm sorry. But do you think I'm going to attack you like a barbarian? Julian said nothing. Alfred sighed, sniffled oddly, and stepped back, shoving his hands into the pockets of his jeans. It was quite dusky in this part of the cottage. Light poured in from the ajar door on the right, and there were two in this cluttered hallway or cluttered living room. Or rather, a cluttered living room, because there couldn't possibly be a living room at the cottage. Julian was more inclined toward the latter, given the fireplace she'd noticed, which must have been unheated for 100 years, so dusty and littered with debris. But she was much more interested in Alfred than in the surroundings. On the way here, her brain had been drawing the most fantastic, disgusting pictures. She imagined being at the mercy of a cynical, immoral scumbag. But why did it seem that now she was just a boy who wanted to seem tough, like the bad guys in action movies, but was desperately afraid of it? So, you're shivering and you'll sneeze tomorrow. Apparently, the prolonged silence in which they were frozen, like two exhibits in an abandoned museum, began to irritate him. Come on, I'll put the tea on. Julian doughtily stomped after her. What's all this for? What? Drinking me tea. It makes sense because you're cold. What does it matter if you're going to? What are you doing? Squealed the girl as Alfred pulled the sweater over his head. The guy froze and rounded his eyes. She took a step back. Another. She put her back against the wall and put her purse in front of her in a desperate protective gesture. No, please, I'm not ready. A moment later, a scratchy woolen article of clothing flew into her face. Stupid. Here, it's cold to look at. Alfred, who was left in a t-shirt, turned his back to her and began to work on the gas stove. Put it on. I'm not peeking. The desire for warmth outweighed the embarrassment of using something that was not hers, much less a man's, and Julian tangled in the sleeves and pulled on the sweater. Thank you, she said quietly, so he wouldn't have heard. You know, I'm really surprised you came. It's just doing something on a word of honor. It's kind of old-fashioned these days. Can't do otherwise, she shrugged, sitting down at the table. What if I bet you something worse, like stealing something? That would never happen, Julian declared smugly. So, what happened is within the bounds of your morality. A teapot and a couple of cups were placed on the table. All three items had clearly once belonged to an obvious set. That's not what I meant to say, the girl muttered. You cheated, caught me giving my word before I knew what the condition was. When he filled the cup, she wrapped her palms around it, her body desperate for some warmth, though it was terribly hot. All right, I give up. I am a scoundrel and a seducer. But the end justified the means. Smiling, he sat down beside me. Is there nothing for tea? She asked timidly, suddenly realizing that her stomach was protesting against the empty drink. Julian had somehow missed lunch and dinner as she pondered nervously. I had chips and a candy bar, but I ate them while I was waiting for you. Oh no, I'm lying. Here's half a chocolate bar. He added it to the table. I see. For a while there was silence in the kitchen, where a lone light bulb shone, apart from the sounds of tea drinking. What was that? Julian was suddenly alert. I didn't hear anything, Alfred said nonchalantly. I heard something. You're imagining things. Is there anyone else in the house? The girl went cold. No. You're lying. I'm not lying. There's no one here. The guy nodded at the doorway. Well, except for him. A puppy came into the room. He was a well-fed colobus, a mix of sheepdog and street Bernard, and he wiggled his nose and paw funny. The first was out of lively young curiosity, The second because it was wrapped in a bandage. Oh, he's so cute. Julian jumped down from her chair and was next to the puppy in no time. Grandma's strict upbringing included, among other rules, one that read, "No animals in my house. Don't go near dogs in the street. They will chew you up and give you fleas." The puppy recoiled, but then, attracted by the fact that the stranger was wearing a sweater that smelled of his master, he moved forward. Where did he come from? He followed me to the station on the way here. He must have hurt his paw on the street. I patched it up a little. Are you gonna keep it? I have a right to. Alfred grinned unhappily. As long as he lives at the dacha, of course, when I leave here on weekdays, he'll stay with the neighbors. I've already arranged it, and then I'll take it. I've decided to rent an apartment for myself. I'm looking for options. I can't bring him to the place where I live now. They'll throw him out on the street. Alfred whistled, calling the dog. But the girl didn't let the doggy take a step and picked him up in her arms, returned to the table, pulled out a chair, sat down and settled the puppy on her lap. The dog, she stated a fact already known to the boy. He's so cute. He reached out to stroke it too, and their fingers met in the thick, silky fur. And the fur must have electrified, because a strange, lingering sensation hit them both. Julian froze, wide-eyed as she watched the boy's face grow closer. "How beautiful you are," he whispered. "That's it, you're finished." The convict grinned and pulled something from his belt that glinted like steel in the cold light of the moon. They were separated by a mere 3 or 4 meters. He was not a coward, but he was not a fool to stay heroically in the house and engage in hand-to-hand combat. Taif? Taif. A puppy threw itself at his master's feet. He wasn't a coward either, but he was too young, and when the house had been broken into, he'd just been scared and huddled under the couch, crying in his own puppy way. And now that 2 good people he knew were there, he risked getting out. Julian took an extra couple of seconds to bend down and pick up the baby. "How did you?" Alfred's eyes widened as they stepped over, or rather jumped over, the convict lying on the floor. He had not expected such a thing from his unwilling guest, but all questions could wait. Without collusion and without wasting any more breath on superfluous words, the young people with the puppy under their armpits flew out of the house and rushed across the plot to the neighbor's cottage. They didn't even turn around to see if they were being followed. They ran up on the porch and banged on the door. "Help! Call the police! Help me!" The further events merged into several long hours, later recalled as if through a fog. Alarmed neighbors came to help, and soon those who had broken into Alfred's father's cottage in the middle of the night were caught. They were indeed, as Juliana thought at once, escaped prisoners. An ambulance also arrived, and the doctor who examined Alfred said that in principle it was nothing serious. His jaw was not broken, and that was the main thing. "Young lady, don't take any more risks like that," the doctor said to Juliana. "Alone on such a big man with a frying pan. Dashing, but, and if you had missed, I can't imagine. And what else could I do?" Now that everything was over, Juliana could not stop shivering, although she was drinking a second mug of scalding hot tea. And 2 woolen plaids, given by kind-hearted dacha neighbors, were thrown over her shoulders. Alfred, disobeying Julian, looked out into the street just as the very convict who had attacked him was being led to the police car. "I wish I had time to fight back." Alfred spat on the ground and shook his fist at the man. He cursed and scrambled to his feet, trying to throw himself back into the fight. But of course, no one would let him. Alfred heard a few more things about himself and his father. "It's all clear," he muttered, walking back into the house and sitting down at the table, leaning over his cup sluggishly. And then he explained to Juliana who it was. It turned out that 2 prisoners had escaped from the very colony where Alfred's father was, and they hadn't chosen his cottage by chance. He had been a lifelong liar, Alfred said. He was both eager to speak and uncomfortable with his own need for candor. Julian also noticed for the umpteenth time that Alfred called his father he. But in principle, such an oddity was already familiar since the boy's parent had gone to the colony 4 years ago. Alfred almost never said father or Lawrence. He lie here too. I thought it would add to this influence in the zone. The young man grinned bitterly. He was still at home when he was still lying about the gold buried in the dacha, which he had stolen back in the 90s. You can imagine, Usually Alfred spoke about his father without emotion, but now, apparently, against the background of the experience, his intonation oozed indignation. He lied to me that there was gold in the garden, and I was just a little kid back then. So I took a shovel and dug joyfully from fence to fence. Where did I get my strength from? He was laughing. You mean there's no gold? Julian asked. No, of course not. Everyone here was using metal detectors about 10 years ago. The summer house was rented out to some students. They listened to that nonsense and started to turn everything upside down looking for it, and there was never any gold. That's it. It's so simple. He couldn't accept the fact that he was no longer the big bandit everyone was afraid of, that he had once lost at cards. Mom left us back then. That's probably why he lost his mind. So he created the illusion that he had money, but it wasn't time to take it yet. What a bastard. Alfred raised his voice. Even before he died, he had time to make a mess. How do I know that no one else will come here, in El Dorado, in the middle of nowhere? I had enough. I'm leaving. It was none of her business. And if she had had the opportunity to leave and never see Alfred again in her life, but a little earlier, before the attack, she would have gladly taken it and would even have given a lot for such a gift of fate. But now, she couldn't explain it to herself, and she didn't want to get into the intricacies of her feelings, but she just suddenly realized that she cared about Alfred. It was discouraging, frightening, made her feel like a bad, spoiled girl. But Julian couldn't change that, even if she wanted to. Will you pass your exams? Alfred extended his hand and snapped his fingers in front of her nose. Wake up. What exams? What will this school give me? What about going to college? She whispered. The woolen blanket slipped off her shoulders, but the girl didn't even notice the chill. Yeah, the institute. People like me, missing. Nothing in life is meant to be. Alfred averted his eyes. No, you're not lost. You don't have to be. There's no such thing as being like your father, or that you have to live your whole life unhappy. You can be different, whatever you want. Julian's voice sounded firm and determined now, as if she were speaking to a large audience, like her class, and had something very important to tell them. What do you know about me? Alfred said it in his usual mocking and superior tone, but there was a different kind of loneliness and lostness in his eyes. Like he was suddenly alone in the world. Julian knew, in fact, that he was. She could have sworn this guy didn't have any really close friends, the kind you trusted like yourself, the kind who wouldn't let you go to waste. And then the thought struck like lightning. But does she have any? A grandmother is something else. A family person, she replaced mom and dad, but still, it's different. And she doesn't have any friends, Julian herself. You're right, she replied. I know the rumors and what you yourself have said. And that's not much. And you don't need more than that. Alfred rose abruptly from the table. Let me call you a cab home. No way. Steve, the neighbor and owner of the cottage, intervened in the conversation. He hadn't overheard the conversation. He just had his own business with the late Sprouts in the next room and overheard a lot of things. Steve had known Alfred for 3 years, that is, exactly since he had bought a plot here. At first, he had thought Alfred was a troublemaker and a criminal. That's how the distant relative of the young man, who became his guardian, had described it. But then Steve changed his opinion, if only because no one in the cottage community and in the nearby village could not recall any bad deeds in which Alfred was involved. If only because this kid was seen in good deeds here. He helped to fix the barn for livestock one grandmother in the village. He helped to find a lost cat in some townspeople who came to the cottage for summer vacation. He participated in clearing the pond of all sorts of garbage, and even once restrained the local gang of hooligans when they got to molest the girls' daughters of the owners of the lost cat. All in all, Alfred was, in Steve's opinion, a great guy. He didn't really understand what he had in common with Juliana and decided that it was probably his girlfriend, a romantic interest, so to speak. Why don't you come and sleep at our place? There's plenty of room. I'll give you some bedding. We'll set up 2 places right away, youngsters. We'll have tea in the morning. Steve waved his hand. And then I'll give you both a lift to the station. All right? Julian and Alfred nodded in agreement, so they all did. Grushenka, at last you're back. A neighbor who looked out of the apartment across the hall rushed to the girl. Good afternoon, Salima. The girl smiled politely. I slept over at an acquaintance's place. She had already prepared a lie about the fact that this acquaintance had a small child, and she needed to work the night shift, and her husband too. And so, until they adjust the schedules as necessary, they are looking for friends who will sit with the baby. But from the next words of the neighbor, Juliana almost fainted. I got a call. I know your grandmother well, Selena said quickly. They called from the hospital. They couldn't reach you. Oh, what a grief. And she was in good health. What? What's wrong with Grandma? Julian leaned against the cold entryway wall. I was called, so the neighbor was in no hurry to get to the point. Anyway, during the night, Leslie got worse. The doctors were frantic. Oh, what a grief. You're all alone, the neighbor longed. Grandmother, is she dead? Julian's hand rose and lay on her neck. How hard it is to breathe. It felt like the sky was going to fall on my head. Was it really like this? Like this? Ridiculous everything. She was far away from her grandmother in her last hour. No, why would you think that? Spit. The neighbor waved her hands. Don't you listen to me at all? What am I telling you, stupid? I'm telling you that you are alone. Since Grandma went to the hospital, it must be hard for you alone. Anyway, by morning she was feeling better, and they called me again to say that they had never seen a patient recover so soon. They say that in such a manner, in a week she'll be home. Oh, Krushenka, why have you turned so pale? You look as if you were undead. Selena, the girl shook her head and turned away, jingling her keys to open her apartment door. You can't talk at all. That's why they don't like you in the whole building. And she went in and slammed the door, extremely impolite, without even saying goodbye to her neighbor. Selena stood with her mouth hanging open. Julian had never let herself do anything like this before. However, said the neighbor, and then, remembering that she had put the chicken on the boil for soup and left the fire on high, she yelped and ran back to her room. Her grandmother was indeed soon discharged home, and life in Juliana's small family quickly returned to normal. But then it became clear that something was changing. Juliana often thought about Alfred. They hadn't seen each other since they parted at the station. The boy said he would go on the next train, but for now he wanted to walk a little more and think about everything. Sometimes walking down the street, Julian caught herself looking for him with her eyes. Why? She couldn't explain it to herself clearly, but she remembered what he had said at the station before the train started. He had said he was very sorry for her and apologized for the idiotic bet. I thought I'd feel better if I got you. It's only made it worse. He didn't explain anything else. He just disappeared. Julian thought once about finding him herself. Just go to this house. Maybe he hadn't had time to move out of this family's apartment yet. But each time she restrained herself from such pointless foolishness. Then, as the train pulled away from Juliana, Alfred looked at her and then, pulling the puppy gently by the leash, went for a walk. He really had a lot to think about. Time after time, he replayed the events of the previous evening. But until the moment when the strangers had broken into the house, when Juliana had yet to arrive, Alfred had been in a state of confusion. In his mind, he knew that he could triumph and get literally anything he wanted from her, but only his own recent impudence somehow began to seem an unworthy, dirty deed. And imagining what would happen when the girl crossed the threshold of the dacha, Alfred somehow could not in his fantasies to do anything indecent. The most he could imagine was a kiss. And this hesitancy, this stupid modesty, only irritated him more. Then he belatedly still thought about the fact that, as promised then in the library, can tomorrow, theoretically, treat kebabs, pork and carolinade is in the fridge, but nothing now for evening tea. Delicious. There is no such thing. It turned out quite nonsense. He invited the girl of his dreams, but he could not accept her. The dog pulled the leash sharply, thus pulling Alfred out of his thoughts. No, said the boy. There are geese grazing there. Let's not go hunting them. Let's go in the grass over there. You little dog. It'll be like a jungle for you. Let's play. But even while having fun with his pet, Alfred couldn't stop the flow of thoughts. Only now they took a different direction. He remembered suddenly how many times his father had grabbed him by the scruff of the neck and said that they were of the same breed, and that Alfred was destined to be a thief, a bandit, and that at 6, at 8, at 10 he hated his father like that. He fought him off, shouted that he would never do such abominations as he did. Because of this, his father was furious and threatened that he would teach his son wisdom. And then, growing up, Alfred began to realize that many people were not ready to listen to him about who he was in himself. It turned out that many people perceived him as the son of that thief Lawrence from so-and-so's house. Alfred faced the fact that children were forbidden to play with him. He was looked down upon in the local stores as if he were 12 years old and only thinking about stealing something. Mistrust, contempt. Alfred responded to all this at first with muffled resentment, and then came other feelings. Alfred became hostile to the world. He didn't want to be like his father, but he also realized that he was too often seen as a creature in Lawrence's shadow, as an extension of him. Alfred grew up a disobedient child. He realized early on that it was not necessary to ask about his mother. He had enough of one frank conversation with his father, who said that she left him for a new family, in which the husband is also right, and even rich, in which other, normal children have already been born. Alfred, it was enough to realize that it turns out that the mother as if there is no, as if he is an orphan half with a living parent. And then it happened so that Alfred found understanding in the company of guys who were considered the main bullies in the neighborhood. They somehow got together. He was attracted by the fact that these guys do not suspect him of any evil, do not persecute. Yes, they were not the ideal of virtue, real hooligans, but society with them beckoned so that he had no strength to resist. Alfred, however, kept a little to himself, and in many of their scandalous antics did not participate. He was 16 when the leader of the gang said that they didn't need a man who wasn't ready to be on the same page with them. Alfred got sidetracked. Except the rumors about what a scumbag he was didn't go away. They grew like weeds, and now he could not and did not want to fight them. In fact, he decided that it was probably even better. They would be more afraid, so they would be less offended. And for a while it seemed that it was normal to exist like that. But now Alfred wasn't so sure. He was sick to think that he had no other way but to follow the stereotypes that surrounded him. It was impossibly strange, but it was since he'd begun to get closer to Julianne that he'd been having those thoughts more often. And after the events of that night, Alfred suddenly realized clearly that he could really make his life anything he wanted it to be. He just had to make up his mind and change everything quickly, finally. Despite the fact that the final exams were approaching and free time was reduced to 0, Julian found an opportunity to work part-time on Sundays. It was a simple job handing out flyers to passersby on the street and paid very little, but it was the very first money earned in the life of a young girl. After calculating the income for 2 weekends, Julian made a difficult decision. How scary it was! But it was too late to retreat. It seemed to her that forward to the fulfillment of her plans, she was drawn by some unknown force, which is simply impossible to resist. First, Juliana went to the confectionery and chose a cake very small, half a kilo. But as assured her saleswoman at home, delicious, it was honey cake with a layer of black currants. And then she walked into the mall, into a familiar clothing store. Julian's heart raced as she stopped at the racks, above which plastic letters that folded into the word "de estilo oyentes" hung invitingly. "Can I get you anything?" Julianne shuddered as the young woman approached her. It was the same slightly familiar Caroline. For the first time in her life, Julianne felt so keenly that she looked wonderful in the old-fashioned chintz dress below the knee, and she felt like a scarecrow. "I'd like to try this on," she said, and pulled the shoulders of the dress. It was a smoky gray knee-high dress made of knitted fabric with a couple of pockets in the front. Juliana chose it because it cost 499 rubles, and she had exactly 500 left after buying the cake. The consultant looked at the dress that the unusual client was wearing, then at the dress on the shoulder pads. "I'm sorry, but may I offer some advice?" She smiled shyly. "These are leftovers from the last collection." And here, stepping back a step, she pointed to 4 mannequins showing brightly colored sundresses made of cotton with floral prints. "A new collection, but we just haven't had time to put these particular models on sale yet. If you want, I will now bring your size," the consultant gabbled amiably. "One moment, please." Before Julianne could say that she shouldn't worry, the consultant disappeared and then reappeared, carrying 4 sundresses of different colors and in 2 sizes each. And right now, Juliana just didn't have the strength to refuse. Once these marvelous outfits were in her hands, it was as if a witch's spell had fallen on her. In the end, she came out of the fitting room clutching a sundress with large fuchsia flowers to her chest, looked down upon in the local stores as if he were 12 years old and only thinking about stealing something. Mistrust, contempt. Alfred responded to all this at first with muffled resentment, and then came other feelings. Alfred became hostile to the world. He didn't want to be like his father. But he also realized that he was too often seen as a creature in Lawrence's shadow, as an extension of him. Alfred grew up a disobedient child. He realized early on that it was not necessary to ask about his mother. He had enough of one frank conversation with his father, who said that she left him for a new family, in which the husband is also right and even rich, in which other normal children have already been born. Alfred, it was enough to realize that it turns out that the mother, as if he is an orphan half with a living parent. And then it happened so that Alfred found understanding in the company of guys who were considered the main bullies in the neighborhood. They somehow got together. He was attracted by the fact that these guys do not suspect him of any evil, do not persecute. Yes, they were not the ideal of virtue, real hooligans, but society with them beckoned so that he had no strength to resist. Alfred, however, kept a little to himself, and in many of their scandalous antics did not participate. He was 16 when the leader of the gang said that they didn't need a man who wasn't ready to be on the same page with them. Alfred got sidetracked, except the rumors about what a scumbag he was didn't go away. They grew like weeds. And now he could not, and did not want to fight them. In fact, he decided that it was probably even better, that would be more afraid, so they would be less offended. And for a while it seemed that it was normal to exist like that. But now Alfred wasn't so sure. He was sick to think that he had no other way but to follow the stereotypes that surrounded him. It was impossibly strange, but it was since he begun to get closer to Julianne that he'd been having those thoughts more often. And after the events of that night, Alfred suddenly realized clearly that he could really make his life anything he wanted it to be. He just had to make up his mind and change everything quickly finally. Despite the fact that the final exams were approaching and free time was reduced to zero, Julianne found an opportunity to work part-time on Sundays. It was a simple job handing out flyers to passers-by on the street and paid very little, but it was the very first money earned in the life of a young girl. After calculating the income for 2 weekends, Julianne made a difficult decision. How scary it was. But it was too late to retreat. It seemed to her that forward to the fulfillment of her plans, she was drawn by some unknown force, which is simply impossible to resist. First, Juliana went to the confectionery and chose a cake very small, half a kilo. But as assured her saleswoman at home, delicious. It was honey cake with a layer of black currants. And then she walked into the mall, into a familiar clothing store. Julianne's heart raced as she stopped at the racks, above which plastic letters that folded into the word DSCOENTs hum invitingly. "Can I get you anything?" Julianne shuddered as the young woman approached her. It was the same slightly familiar Caroline. For the first time in her life, Julianne felt so keenly that she looked wonderful in the old-fashioned chintz dress below the knee, and she felt like a scarecrow. "I'd like to try this on," she said, and pulled the shoulders of the dress. It was a smoky gray knee-high dress made of knitted fabric with a couple of pockets in the front. Juliana chose it because it cost 499 rubles, and she had exactly 500 left after buying the cake. The consultant looked at the dress that the unusual client was wearing, then at the dress on the shoulder pads. "I'm sorry, but may I offer some advice?" She smiled shyly. "These are leftovers from the last collection." And here, stepping back a step, she pointed to 4 mannequins showing brightly colored sundresses made of cotton with floral prints. "A new collection, but we just haven't had time to put these particular models on sale yet. If you want, I will now bring your size." The consultant gabbled amiably. "One moment, please." Before Julianne could say that she shouldn't worry, the consultant disappeared and then reappeared, carrying 4 sundresses of different colors and in 2 sizes each. And right now, Juliana just didn't have the strength to refuse. Once these marvelous outfits were in her hands, it was as if a witch's spell had fallen on her. In the end, she came out of the fitting room clutching a sundress with large fuchsia flowers to her chest. "It's a great choice. It suits you very well," continued Caroline, who immediately escorted the happy-looking customer to the checkout and there, having sent her partner to the back of the hall to fix her clothes, which had been tumbled around all day, she herself began to calculate the price. "Thank you for helping me choose," Juliana smiled, her cheeks burned with a feverish blush. "Thank you, Caroline. Always happy to help update the image," smiled the one in return. Julian didn't know that Caroline had already looked at her before approaching her and realized from the fact that she had counted the bills several times that the budget for the outfit was very small. Juliana didn't know that the sundress she had chosen actually cost $2,500 with all the discounts. "So you owed exactly $500, the counselor said with a nonchalant look. Julian was already holding out the money, but her eyes fell on the cash register display, where the real price was displayed, and Caroline had hoped the girl wouldn't notice it. But Julian stammered and looked incomprehensible. "That's the old price. The system malfunctioned." Caroline quickly found it. "That'll be 500 rubles. And seeing that the girl was procrastinating, Caroline herself took the bill from her hands and also slid a rustling bag of clothes toward her across the counter. "Take it, please. And thank you for buying." They exchanged glances, and it was so quick, so piercing, so clear. Julian clutched the package to her as if she couldn't believe in its tangible reality. "Thank you," and she walked out of the store. Before the girl, who was acting as a cashier in the store that day, returned to her seat, Caroline had managed to take out of her pocket a purse that she simply did not risk to leave in the changing room of the shopping center for the staff, and put into the cash register the missing $2,000 for the sold sundress. If in those moments there was someone who would have asked her about the reason for such an act, she would not have been able to clearly answer what moved her, but certainly not ordinary pity. It was just, she decided that it was the right thing to do. It was not the first time Caroline had seen Julian in this store or in the city. They lived on the same street, and even their houses were close window to window. Caroline was not a gossip, but if you did not live a reclusive life, you would learn about many of your neighbors, and especially about those about whom people said that they were strange. This is how Caroline came to know Grandma Leslie and her child from afar through hearsay. Caroline herself had been raised in a single-parent family by her grandparents. True, not because of orphanhood, just parents were constantly on business trips, then in tourist trips, in general, lived their own, some separate from the native child, a rich life. But Caroline's grandparents were quite modern people, and so for her, Juliana's upbringing seemed wild, but there was nothing to be done. Caroline had long been married for 10 years. It was quite a happy union, and in principle, her husband's income would allow her to exist as a housewife. But when her son Victor went to the first grade, Caroline decided that enough of her reclusiveness and got a job in this shopping center, especially since she had always wanted the job to have something to do with clothes. Perhaps Caroline sometimes thought it was somehow passed on from her grandmother, who had worked as a dressmaker for almost 40 years. It was here, in the clothing store, and Caroline had a chance to get to know Julian and her grandmother better. And the visits of an old woman and a teenage girl, who then turned into a young and beautiful girl. The whole store, as they say, was painful to watch, because Leslie, in her characteristic manner, was always reprimanding her granddaughter. "Don't touch it, you'll tear it. No, you're not wearing that shit. No way. It's not for you. Put it back. Don't cry. I spend the money. I decide what you wear." These were the phrases that accompanied their trips to the store for a down jacket, demi-jacket, and other outerwear. A miserable child, another saleswoman once expressed a similar opinion to Carolina's. What will she grow up to be, with a grandmother like that? Caroline shook her head. She didn't know what to say, and she felt guilty for some reason. It seemed that it was impossible to watch her grandmother raising her granddaughter indifferently all these years, keeping her swaddled in a cocoon of strange, frightening, giving off a slight madness of care. That's why Caroline had done that with the sundress. She suddenly realized that it seemed that something special had happened in Juliana's life. Something immeasurably important that moved her to finally break that cocoon. "Grandma," Julian said, "let's have some tea." When she returned home, the girl hastily stashed her new clothes in her room and went to the kitchen. She put the kettle on, put out the tea pairs from the special ceremonial set, which, according to the established rules, appear on the table only on holidays. And on the calendar, a magnetic bright square marked the most ordinary Sunday. "What's this?" The old woman frowned. "When did you bake this?" "I didn't bake, Grandma." Julian smiled and pushed her chair over. "Hi, Grandma. Don't be angry, okay? I decided not to go for a walk this weekend, not to the theater, not to go to exhibitions, not to the library, but to work a little." And Julian told her mentor about what she had been doing. "I just decided that I'm graduating soon and I need to, at least some experience, how to work to get." Leslie sat down at the table. She looked incredulously at the piece of cake her granddaughter had dropped on her plate. "Grandma, it's all natural and it's fresh. But, well, you can't always just bake your own cakes. Sometimes you can also." "How much did you make?" "1,000, Julian replied. "How much is the cake?" 500. "Where's the rest of the money?" Julian swallowed hard. "The school asked me to take a job as a prom photographer." She blurted out the first thing that came to mind. And when Granny Ray's faded blue eyes squinted intently, Julian had no doubt in those moments she would be exposed now. But here Leslie nodded. "It used to be customary to ask your elders what to do." "Well, come on. What can I take from you, you foolish girl? And after school, no job. You'll go to school." The old woman finally broke off a piece of cake with a dessert spoon. She brought it to her mouth. The granddaughter held her breath. "That'll do," Leslie said, and didn't say another word during the tea. Then she asked to have her blood pressure taken and laid down on the sofa in front of the TV to watch a documentary about VDNK. The girl was happy that the cake was favorably received. Her grandmother was amazingly nice. The last time Julian had brought a store-bought cake to the hospital, she had thrown it out the window, shouting that she would not poison herself with palm oil. Maybe today's tea party is a sign of good things to come. Julian smiled as she finished the dishes, but then she remembered Alfred again. It seemed like an eternity since that unimaginable incident at the cottage, and in all that time she hadn't seen Alfred. It was as if he had disappeared from her life altogether, vanished into thin air. The only thing she knew was that he had dropped out of school after all. However, this surprised few people there, and the head teacher, not hesitating in expressions, prophesied this bully the most terrible end like his father. Julian did not agree with her and almost spoke out loud, but she held back. It wouldn't have made any difference. Who would believe her that Alfred wasn't really as horrible a person as everyone thought he was? Julian had passed her final exams, and finally the big day of graduation had arrived. The grandmother knew in advance that her granddaughter would wear a dark blue velvet dress, which Juliana's mother once wore to the school graduation. That dress, under a black silk sash, was now hanging on its hangers on the closet door. But yesterday's schoolgirl, going to the main holiday, was now dressing up in front of the mirror, admiring herself in a very different outfit. A sundress with marvelous juicy pink flowers. For the first time, Juliana didn't put her hair in a braid, but instead, having washed it in the evening, twisted it into curls. She didn't have a blowtorch at home, of course, but she used an old folk trick and got the curls with the help of ordinary socks. "Granddaughter, what took you so long, huh? You'll be late." Julian flinched when she heard her grandmother, but the smile didn't disappear from her face. She felt more confident than ever. After another glance at herself in the mirror, she walked resolutely to the door. Leslie staggered backwards, and if she hadn't taken her heart pills that morning, she might have had a second heart attack. Because the granddaughter, what a sight she appeared, as if Grushenka wasn't even her own. "Grandma, I love you very much." The girl intercepted the old woman's hands, gently squeezed the wrinkled hands with her cold fingers. "But in that dress, my mother's dress, I won't go. I bought it from my paycheck. I can't live like this anymore, Grandma. It's not right." And so they stood opposite each other, the old generation and the young, the people most dear to each other. The closest people who sometimes could almost read each other's minds, and at the same time very different, belonging to different worlds. But then Leslie as if died. Her lips and chin trembled, her eyes darkened. She took her hands away and sighed deeply, full-breasted, exhaled through her teeth. Julian put her hands behind her back and lowered her eyes. "I won't be long, Grandma. I'll just get my diploma. Take a picture with the kids in the park and go home, Grandma. She took a time and stepped toward the door. I'll go, okay. Go, said Leslie, suddenly calm. And don't be in a hurry. It's such a young thing. Stop. She stopped when the girl opened the door to the landing. Leslie opened the soap box. It was an old ceramic box with roses on the lid. The soap that had been in it almost 100 years ago smelled of roses too. Now it held cash, which was usually used to go to the store for groceries, to pay the light bill, and so on. Determinedly, the old woman shoveled out all the contents of the box, about $3,000, and handed it to her granddaughter. Here, I remember we didn't give it up for graduation, so give it to whoever needs it. It's not out of favor that they're feeding you. Grandma, go already. The old woman interrupted her and waved her arms as if she were chasing away a butterfly that had accidentally flown into the house, or you'll be late. Julian left. Leslie returned to the hall and sank down in her favorite chair, her hands on the armrests, and closed her eyes. The clock ticked quietly. Tears rolled down from under the old woman's closed eyelids, but it was a light sadness just somehow came to suddenly realize that everything, the granddaughter grew up. Though I tried to keep her from foolishness, temptations, vices of this world, but apparently people are right. It is impossible to hide it from the youth. And then Leslie dozed off. Her classmates, who saw Juliana in her new clothes, but most importantly in an unusual form, did not immediately recognize who was in front of them. For a while, the merry murmur subsided and all eyes were fixed on the newcomer. Some of the guys whistled, and many girls looked enviously. It turned out that the odd girl had a gorgeous figure, and her hair, usually hidden in tight braids, was now curling in lush, silky curls. Julian, Headmaster Barry approached the girl. You're great, he spread his hands. I wouldn't be lying if I said I've never seen a more beautiful senior in my life. Much later, looking back on this day, Juliana understood that his bright events merged in the end into one long action, like multicolored glasses of a kaleidoscope are put together in one pattern. But this applied to the day exactly until the moment when, after a walk in the park, sitting in a cafe and general photographing, she was suddenly called by a familiar voice. The sun was already setting. Its fiery golden rays penetrated the green of the trees and still blinded her. So Juliana squinted her eyes, and the silhouette of the guy standing nearby turned out to be quite blurred. Alfred, she said in disbelief. The other seniors didn't even notice her slipping away, their first impressions having dissipated, and they were more interested in each other's company, leaving the strange-looking roommate to her own devices, as in previous years. Alfred stood at the entrance to the park. Alfred was standing at the entrance to the park, again in tattered jeans, but his jacket was a new brownish-red one that fit. Congratulations, he said and smiled. You dropped out of school after all, she said reproachfully. But that wasn't what she'd meant to say when she was almost running toward him. I've been busy, selling the apartment and the cottage. He glanced down and back, smirking. And you're a pretty girl, it turns out. Okay, I won't distract you. I nodded at the group of school children in the distance. I'm not with them, Julian replied. I guess I don't fit in with society after all. You don't need that, Alfred said. You'll find other people you'll be comfortable with. It was a strange word and phrase for him in general. Julian squinted her eyes. So you decided to leave after all. I need to find my place somewhere. Okay. He was obviously going to say something else, but he stifled himself and took a step back. Have a nice day. Julian didn't have time to say what she wanted to say, that they needed to talk, that he wasn't all alone, that she had to understand. She had to find out how to help him in. But all these thoughts were swarming in her mind. She couldn't put it all out coherently right now. She could only stare at him. How she needed him to take a tiny step toward her. Just the tiniest bit. But he sent her a freezing stare instead. His face contorted hard, and he turned and simply ran. And at the same time, it seemed that he was not just rushing to the bus. He was running away from her and from the conversation that could take place between them. The figures of swans surrounded by live snow-white hyacinths with flecks of candy-pink eustoma were beautiful. And if the organizer of this wedding celebration was asked to name the most successful element of the banquet hall decoration, she would have pointed to these ice sculptures. Rhythmically tapping a mini pen on the page of the notebook, the entries in which were so small and abbreviated that only their creator could decipher it. The girl looked at her creation. Splendid. Thanks to this order, she would finally close the mortgage for the apartment, and after it, perhaps she could treat herself to a vacation, which she hadn't been on for the past 2 years. With a satisfied sigh and a nod to her own thoughts, Julian returned the writing utensils to the pocket of the immaculately tailored smoky gray jacket that went with the pencil skirt and silk blouse in a soft lavender shade. Stylish, but not overly dressy, because she, after all, is a responsible person here and in no way should not compete with the bride or even the guests. "Guys, this way," came a voice from behind us as the doors opened. Julian rounded her eyes as some workers with a stepladder and some other guy in a black suit entered the room. "Over there," the guy stretched out, pointing his hand at the wall. More precisely, on that part of it, which was located behind the seats for the young and was generously draped with silk and brocade, the folds of which were supported by golden figures of cupids. "Hey, what are you doing?" The girl stomped indignantly toward the intruders. "Don't you dare touch anything." The workers stopped and turned to the supervisors and the supervisors to her. "Security," the tall brunette threw and stuck his thumbs behind the belt of his pants and smirked. "That came out extremely cheeky. We are working. Please do not interfere. Stay out of it." Julian burst out indignantly. "Do you know how long we've been laying this up? What do you think you're doing here? Why didn't I do anything?" And then she stopped talking because the young man's face seemed familiar. "Alfred?" Apparently, mutual recognition came to them synchronously. "Julian," he said, "what are you doing here?" "A wedding," she replied simply and quite matter-of-factly. "What are you doing here?" "Working too," he replied. "So what should we do?" one of the workers asked. "Wait a minute." Alfred waved him away and focused his attention back on the young woman in front of him. He remembered her. All those years he'd been picking up the pieces of his life. And she remembered him, too often than she would have liked, much more often than she should have remembered a guy she knew from school, not even a classmate, whose close acquaintance had taken place under not the most romantic circumstances. But that was the past, and now they exchanged a few more phrases, and it turned out that Alfred is the head of security of the father of the bride, Bruce, a complicated man, a businessman, and even an oligarch. Alfred had spent almost all these years in other lands and then, having built up a solid reputation in the security field, decided to return to the city, which he still considered the most native place. And it was here that he eventually found his best job. "I never would have guessed," Julian said frankly, when Alfred informed her what he was doing. "Of course, with my pedigree and track record," he replied, and it was not clear whether he was really offended or was being kindly ironic about himself. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." Julian was immediately taken aback. It was normal, so familiar, as if all those years apart hadn't happened. Alfred grinned. "And you create all this?" He circled the surrounding space with his hand. "Cute, but of course terribly girlish, if you know what I mean." "Not at all." Julian was always very sensitive, on the verge of being painful, to criticism of her creations. She could speak calmly about anything and everything only directly to her clients, but the rest of us would be better to hold our tongues. Julian herself often regretted her temper, but found the reason for it. Apparently, it was hereditary from her grandmother's temper. The decoration is created taking into account the tastes and wishes of the bride and groom. "Our agency is focused on the current global trends in wedding fashion," said the girl. "Wait a minute," bowed Alfred's head. "Ours. Are you married and doing business with your husband? Do you think that's the only way to do it?" Julian frowned again. "No, just like that," he thought, scratching at the back of his head with a familiar gesture. "I'm not married." "Wonderful. What do you mean?" "Oh, never mind. So you started an agency with someone and you do weddings?" "Mostly them. But we also do wedding anniversaries, engagement parties." "Do you celebrate divorces?" "No." Julian had fallen into such a strange state of mind from the conversation with Alfred that she even missed the trill of her work phone. The girl carried 2 miniature smartphones, the second one containing only personal contacts. And before, such neglect of her professional duties was not peculiar to her. Who would ever think of celebrating a divorce? "I don't know," he shrugged. "I was celebrating. I went to the sea for 2 weeks, just lying on the sand and matured. To go on, well, to live. And I asked about you, well, I thought that if you like weddings so much, you should probably be married already, maybe even more than once. Why is that? To the first impressions of delight, surprise, and even heart palpitations, a familiar irritation began to set in. It's just déjà vu. So it is a wedding. How many different weddings can be played? Having the opportunity and imagination. Alfred spoke absolutely serious tone, but his eyes laughed. I'm not married. I haven't been yet, Julian replied, nervously fixing her already perfect hair, which was now a bob. So what do you need to do here? The cameras have lost the image of the auditorium. You must have covered it up with your fancy trinkets. So put the cameras somewhere else. It's got the perfect viewing angle. It's not my problem. The design has already been thought out, and it is impossible to change it. Who cares where the bows are? This is about safety. What? Are you afraid the bride will be stolen? Don't worry, it's not in the script. I don't know. Alfred was suddenly close, just dangerously close, literally hovering over her with his whole weight. Julian thought, inappropriately, that he'd gotten noticeably bigger or broader in the shoulders. It's been 10 years, Alfred said. You haven't changed at all. But very much so, the girl felt awkward, and for some reason she was sure that the traitorous blush was well visible, despite the foundation, blush, and powder. So what to do? Couldn't stand it. One of the workers, who had a bunch of other things planned for the day. Julian and Alfred backed away, just bounced away from each other like a flock of birds scattering. And soon, with Julian's instruction, the textile decor was moved so that it would not block the CCTV cameras. Well, now everything is ready, the girl said smugly, and Alfred visibly revived. So can we talk? Julian wanted to say that she was terribly busy, but that wouldn't be true. And besides, she wanted to talk to the man who had made her heart beat so strangely often all these years. There were still a few hours before the wedding reception at the bride's father's mansion, and Alfred and Julian had agreed to sit on the back porch for a while. It was the quietest place right now. They sat down directly on the steps. In front of them stretched out as if wild, but in fact skillfully cultivated garden in the English style. Juliana told about how after 2 courses at the university to study philology, she realized that it was absolutely not her business and dropped out, deciding to take a big risk just to make a living for a while, as it turns out, and in parallel to look for themselves. In the end, it turned out that she liked to create holidays, and 5 years ago she and Caroline created a small agency, which by now has become one of the leading in the city. Caroline. Alfred was surprised. The one whose husband is an electrician. They also have Victor's son. I remember her. She always treated me differently, he added and averted his eyes. Not like the others. I know, Julian nodded. She and I were talking about you the other day, and she told me all about it, that you weren't a monster at all. And when again did you think I was a monster? He squinted his eyes as if with resentment. When you invited me to the cottage, I swear, Julian smiled. It was the most nightmarish date of my life. And mine. I'd give anything to have it any other way. And anyway, what an idiot I was. I should have just asked her out in a normal way to a movie, for example. I shouldn't have been afraid that you'd say no. Understandably, the girl nervously tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The conversation somehow suddenly turned into a direction that was not the most convenient for free conversation. How's Grandma? Asked Alfred. She's fine. I'm amazed at her age, and she's still going strong. Her health, of course, sometimes fails her. But in terms of fortitude, she's enough for 10 people. You know, I've only recently been able to understand her. It seemed to me then, when I had just finished school, that I had escaped from a nightmare. And then, I was able to realize that she just loved me very much and thought to protect me that way. I talked to the doctor. My grandmother is seeing a psychologist, Julian explained, and she agreed to go to him to find out why she was having bad dreams. And then he got her talking, and then it's easier for us to live together. Anyway, the psychologist doesn't want to scare her, but he said it's like she had an obsession. Good thing she stopped in time. You know, sometimes I feel so guilty for leaving Grandma alone for so long. But I got her a nurse. She's a very decent woman. She takes good care of her. And now she doesn't need anything. The girl smoothed her skirt on her knees, looked at Alfred carefully, catching his gaze. How long have you been divorced? Last year. I told you we didn't see eye to eye. I guess I'm just not a good person. Somehow I thought you changed since then, and not for the worse, so I don't think you're a bad person. Alfred, what about your mother? She said carefully. Do you know what's wrong with her? I mean, have you ever thought about? I found her, Alfred answered, and it seemed that he was ready to answer frankly to this question, but only wanted to get off as soon as possible. We talked. Calmly, peacefully, she apologized and told me not to come back. She really has a whole other life. There's no place for me there, but I forgave her. That's it. Julian was silent. They just sat side by side and watched the wind move the tall, lush grasses and the flowers among them. I've forgotten, Julian exclaimed. Master, 10 years is a long time for a dog, but he's fine. Alfred grinned. He lives here with me. He's in the enclosure now. Do you want to say hello? He stood up and offered his hand to the girl. I do. She rose, accepting the outstretched palm. Do you want to bet? Alfred rounded his eyes. He hadn't expected this at all. Conditions? The master will recognize me immediately, and then you'll give me a personal tour of the place. Tell me what the security service does. I only know from movies you walk around and talk to someone on the radio all the time, right? Almost, Alfred replied. And if you lose? Then you can take a chance and ask me out. The young man grinned. It was a very tempting offer, and whatever the outcome of the bet, he somehow had no doubt that the date would happen, and it would be very easy to turn the excursion into one. And Alfred also thought that perhaps now he had to become a really good guy. It was necessary to become a good husband for Julianne.
Helga and Andrew were together for almost 3 years. The woman believed that marriage was almost a settled issue, because at first her beloved constantly said that in just a little while they would have free funds for a luxurious celebration. Embarrassed, Helga tried to explain that she didn't need any big celebrations. But the man, hugging her tightly, convinced everything should be perfect for my beloved girl. The best restaurant, a luxurious dress, a stunning photo shoot so that years later we can show the wedding album to our children with such speeches. Helga completely lost the ability to argue with her beloved and patiently waited for Andrew to finally decide that the accumulated funds would be enough for all his ideas. The woman sometimes felt that her partner was fooling her, but he skillfully supported her faith in a happy future. And in the end, she even defended him in front of her relatives. My mother, who moved many years ago following her new husband to the other side of the country, constantly received Helga in phone conversations and correspondence in instant messengers. Daughter, take off your rose-colored glasses. Since your Andrew says he loves you but still doesn't want to get married, run away from him. He just settled down comfortably, living on everything he had ready, and you don't even have the right to vote to defend a modest wedding, as you want. Brother Denny prudently did not meddle in his sister's affairs. But his wife, Lily, completely agreed with her mother-in-law and convinced Helga, honestly, it's a pity to watch how you waste your life. Yes, it was enough for me to see how this Andrew treats you once to understand that nothing worthwhile will come of you. Besides, as far as I managed to catch, his relatives are not at all happy with you. Do you remember how many times he took you to visit your parents? Helga, in love, tried to protect Andrew. Lily continued to persuade, citing, as it seemed to her, an ironclad argument. If they greeted you normally, you would happily go to them. To this, Helga had nothing to say. On Andrew's side, her relatives were not at all delighted with her, and the young woman was even disgusted to remember how the face of her beloved mother grimaced when she named her profession. Helen, Andrew's sister, did not remain silent and loudly asked, "So do you do a manicure?" "That's cool. I file and paint my nails all day long." "Granny, can you hear?" She shouted towards the kitchen. Andrew will now always go with a manicure and pedicure, and will probably get it too. Helga was not shy about her work, but she was very uncomfortable. In addition, Andrew, after sitting at the table for a while, explained that he needed to make an important call, and went out onto the landing. The man returned when his mother was already putting the cake on the table, and Helga was exhausted by Helen's questions and malicious jokes. She was ready to howl. She wanted to send the whole company and the women looking condescendingly at her to hell. And had the beloved stayed even a few more minutes, most likely the guest would not have been able to stand it, and told the hostesses everything she thought about their snobbery. As if to atone for his escape from the holiday dinner on the way home, Andrew was especially courteous to Helga. In general, the woman in love decided that she would not overreact to the unkind reception given to her and enjoyed the company of her loved one. A year has passed since Helga moved in with Andrew. The second year flew by, the third year was coming to an end, and no changes in social status were foreseen. Moreover, Helga began to guess that her beloved had ceased to be faithful to her. Outwardly, everything was almost the same as before, but small details gave Andrew away completely. At first, he stopped picking her up after finishing work. He made an excuse by saying that he had to stay late because of a large order. And she believed and felt sorry for the unfortunate man who has to do everything for himself and for others. He eagerly flew away with everything that was prepared for his arrival, and completely stopped inviting her somewhere to unwind, as was their custom so recently. Now, after dinner, Andrew lay down on the sofa or sat near the game console to complete the next level. Helga tried to initiate joint entertainment, but it seemed that nothing could move Andrew from his favorite places at home. "Baby, I'm so exhausted," the man explained. "Give me at least a little rest. You're smart, and you understand perfectly how tired I am." Helga quietly stepped aside and went to clean, do laundry, or do some other work. Recently, it has become painful for her that upon returning home from work, Andrew was not eager as usual to hug her, but first hurried to the shower. Helga tried not to force things and not to strain the relationship, fearing that scandals would lead to a breakup. The only act that the woman did against the will of her beloved was that in the second year of living together she brought a small puppy into the apartment, at a quick glance at which it was obvious that there were many breeds among its ancestors. Can you imagine? Someone threw it in a tied bag in the trash. I threw out the trash. I hear some rustling. I thought that the rats were completely insolent and weren't afraid of anyone. And then I realized that someone inside the bag took it out, untied it, and there. Helga looked helplessly at her loved one, who was wincing from the story told to him as if from an attack of toothache, and spoke categorically. "I have nothing against animals, but you'd better take this flea-beard one to where you found it. He's scary, like some kind of hobbit." Helga objected. "He's not scary. Very charming, too. The paws are so furry. Listen, let's call him Frodo." The woman gave a lot of arguments. And finally, although without much enthusiasm, Andrew agreed. The puppy remained in the apartment and grew up to the delight of Olia. She considered him her best friend, and partly caring for the baby distracted her from thoughts that it was time to give birth to a child. However, before this important event, Helga hoped to one day hear a marriage proposal. She had particular hopes for a joint vacation, which they had planned almost 6 months in advance. But suddenly Andrew changed his mind and explained. "Listen, take someone for your company and go on vacation without me. At work, the project won't be completed without me. We'll relax with you sometime later." Out of solidarity, Helga also did not go to warmer climes. Besides, she didn't want to burden Andrew with caring for Frodo. She took up household chores that everyone had never gotten around to before, tried to make the apartment cozy, and even did some minor cosmetic repairs on her own. Moreover, Andrew has long reproached the woman for the fact that the puppy she picked up caused a lot of destruction to the apartment. "This dog of yours does not bring any benefit, only losses from it. The door was scratched. Give her to a shelter. They will try to place her in a family. And if you really want to, you can play around with sponsoring this establishment a little." However, if in some ways Helga was ready to endlessly adapt to her loved one, then in the matter of the dog's place of residence she was adamant. "Frodo didn't do anything too terrible, and I won't take him to any shelter." The dog was a faithful companion in all walks, which Andrew increasingly refused to do. Helga sometimes felt that their relationship no longer resembled love at all, but represented a format of communication between the master of the house and the servants. The woman tried to find an excuse for her partner, but the end of the affair was very unexpected. About an hour after Andrew left on a business trip, the apartment door suddenly swung open, and Helga, thinking that the man had forgotten something, jumped out into the hallway in a t-shirt and short shorts and saw her beloved sister. Frodo, not too angrily, but carefully bared his teeth at the illegal guest, who brazenly opened the apartment with a spare key, and she rudely declared, taking pepper spray out of her pocket, "Come on, put the dog somewhere in the toilet, otherwise she won't find it enough. And let's go talk." Such an aggressive start to Andrew's sister's visit came as a complete surprise to Helga. However, she did not argue, and hiding the dog, invited her to go into the room. "In general, we need to talk seriously," the guest announced. "Mom chose an excellent match for Andrew. Profitable, unlike you. The family he ends up with will greatly help his career. And with you, he is only wasting time. So it will work for pennies. He himself does not dare to tell you about it, but he and a suitable bride have already submitted an application. There will be a wedding soon. Only he feels sorry for you, you see, and has no idea how to break this news. And there is no reason for me to start a ceremony with you. So come on, pack your things and clear the area. Leave the apartment. And don't think that you can bear everything that doesn't belong to you. I'll be watching you. Otherwise, you never know. You decide to steal something." Helga recovered from the absurdity of everything that was happening quite quickly, because she simply could not believe Helen's words and tried to shield the groom. "What nonsense. I saw Andrew off an hour ago, and he said goodbye to me very warmly." "Do not believe. You're right. If you want, call him and ask him directly." Helga listened to the advice and told Andrew in a few words about his sister's visit and clarified. "Is it true that you are planning to marry another woman? Do I need to pack my things now," as Helen put it. The not too confident voice on the phone was the first blow for Helga. The woman sat down on a chair and heard something that instantly broke her heart. "Helga, you are very good. You are the best woman in my life. But circumstances have developed so that we need to separate." Under the malicious gaze of Helen, who didn't even think about leaving the room, Helga tried not to cry, but it was impossible to hold back the tears, and she almost shouted, "Why didn't you tell me everything personally?" Andrew, who managed to collect his thoughts after the initial confusion, stopped being embarrassed and answered cheerfully, "Sorry. Actually, I wanted to talk to you about the breakup several times, but somehow I didn't want to offend you. Understand, I'm also a living person, and it's not easy for me to erase everything that happened between us." The man said something else, but Helga, putting the phone on the table, stopped listening to him. Each of his phrases felt like a dull pain in his chest, and he wanted to hide from Helen's mocking gaze. The woman, acting as if under hypnosis, began to pack her things, bitterly reflecting on the fact that the rolling suitcase she had bought for the trip had come in handy. Only now it's not a foreign voyage planned, but a move, essentially to nowhere. Helga stopped abruptly. And where did the moral strength come from? "Look, I don't even have anywhere to go right now. Because with a dog, it's unlikely that I'll be able to quickly find rented housing. Give me a few days, please. I'll find an apartment where the owners will let us in, and I'll take Frodo right away. Give me at least 2 days. By the time Andrew returns, I and the dog will have already left here." However, Helen was determined. "Never. You never know how you will behave. And then how can I justify myself to my brother? Come on, get ready, and don't forget your dog. Listen, why are you pretending to be a naive fool, and even trying to push for pity? You probably know that my brother has always been against animals in the apartment. Only you are a benefactor. True, at someone else's expense. From what I hear, your dog is scratching the bathroom door. Andrew is right. There are only losses from you and this flea. On a good note, we should take money from you for repairs. But I'm not petty. So fold your laundry and clothes and go ahead, sorry, goodbye." Helga became disgusted from her own gullibility and some kind of emotional blindness. She felt deep down that Andrew had not been completely honest with her lately, but she still tried not to notice any warning bells. So I waited. The bells turned into an alarm bell from Helen's shrill voice and real betrayal from Andrew. She somehow threw things, which turned out to be not so much, into the suitcase, put an almost new down jacket into a bulky shopping bag, and picked up a bag with the remains of food for Frodo in the kitchen. She acted mechanically. She opened the bathroom, put a leash on the dog, leaving the muzzle dangling around her neck, and left the apartment where she spent almost 3 years of her life. Frodo carried a bag of food in his teeth, walking sedately, and was nearby, occasionally distracting himself to mark trees that were especially interesting to him. And Helga had no idea where they were going. Both her mother and her brother's wife warned her that Andrew was too keen on getting married, but she didn't want to hear the reasonable arguments of her relatives. The beloved constantly somehow explained the impossibility of getting married in the near future. And now, Please's sister humiliatingly kicked the girl out of the apartment. Helga understood that she was left with nothing. It was possible to try to compensate for the amount of repairs made in Andrew's apartment with her money, because he bought himself a foreign car for the occasion, but the woman did not have the slightest desire to meet with this man and members of his family anymore. Outbred Frodo as a dog that she herself fed and raised. That's all the memory of the relationship. Besides, if she had listened to Andrew, she wouldn't have had a pet. Mom has long been building her happiness on the other side of the country, and going to her, of course, is not an option at all. Only Denny remains. Helga happily found a phone in the pocket of her shorts, in which she left her ex-lover's apartment, and called her brother. Without going into details, the woman asked, "Hello, can I stay with Frodo today?" The brother, sensing something was wrong in his younger sister's voice, immediately agreed and suggested, "Where are you now?" "I'm somewhere in your area on business. Maybe I should grab you and the dog?" Helga happily accepted her brother's offer and named the cafe where she often met with Lilia and her nephews as a landmark. Andrew categorically did not want her relatives to visit his apartment, and now the woman clearly saw in this behavior the frivolity of her former roommate's intentions. The daughter-in-law did not have to wait long. In the back seat of the family car and child car seats were nephews, the eldest, 7-year-old Max, and the youngest, 1-year-old George, who joyfully waved their hands to their beloved aunt and dog. Lily immediately understood from the tear-stained eyes of her husband's sister what had happened, and opening the trunk to help put a few belongings there, Helga casually remarked, "I won't even remind you that I warned you about the vile nature of your Andrew. I'll just say I'm very glad that you woke up. It was high time to end this relationship. Rejoice in your freedom, and do not be sad for someone who is not worthy of you. He's not worth your little finger." A drone and a weakling. Helga sat in the front seat. Frodo managed to sit at the feet of his hostess, very compactly for his size, and soon the whole company was already accommodated in the small apartment of Denny and Lily. Helga understood that in a family with 2 children growing up, she and her dog would greatly displace the owners, and she started calling colleagues from the salon where she worked. However, no one had relatives or acquaintances who could rent out the corner for an acceptable price. Anne's boss, however, offered an option, but the owner of the apartment asked for such a high rental price that, if she agreed to it, she simply would not have anything to live on. Max fussed with Frodo, showing his younger brother how joyfully the dog alternately gave paws, as if playing. And the 2 women watching this sweet picture smiled synchronously. Helga shrugged guiltily. "Sorry, Lily, but it looks like you won't be able to find an apartment quickly." Not even a shadow of irritation or dissatisfaction flashed on Lily's face. On the contrary, she suggested, as if making excuses, "Helga, if you don't mind, let's put you and Frodo on the balcony for now. It's warm now, and there's already a cot there. I myself enjoy watching the city there in the evenings. It will probably be a little inconvenient, but there is generally not enough space in the kitchen." There was a table with a refrigerator. They could barely fit it in. It's a pity that we haven't had time to expand our living conditions yet, but now there will be an incentive to move more actively. Then there will be enough space for everyone. Denny, who came home from work in the evening, suggested that his sister talk to Andrew like a man, but Helga flatly refused. "No, don't. You'll find more problems on your own. Let him live as he wants." Albeit cramped, but not offended, Helga spent the night in her brother's apartment, although she understood that the option of walking from the balcony through the master's bedroom to take the dog for a walk in the morning was not at all convenient. After breakfast, Lily suddenly turned to Olya with a strange question. "Actually, what keeps you in this area? You can find a job anywhere in the city." Helga shrugged. "The owner, Alice, has a chain of salons. She sometimes allows us to change locations due to relocation or when there is a vacancy." The daughter-in-law almost clapped her hands. "Look, I think I know what to do. My aunt left me with a house on the outskirts of the city, with all the amenities, by the way. Of course, no one has lived there since the winter, and a general cleaning will probably be required, but this is the normal way out of the situation. You ask your boss if she has a salon in that area and if there is free space in it, and I think everything will just work out wonderfully. Fresh air. The dog, again, is free. We will visit you. It will be really cool in the summer. I can even move there with the boys." Denny strongly supported his wife's idea. "Lily, but you're right. Really, how did this not occur to me?" Helga doubted that the boss would meet her halfway, but the idea was indeed a good one. The woman decided that she was not risking anything, even if Alice could not transfer her to another salon. You can at least try to live in Lee's house, find money, and go to work. Even if you have to leave early, the issue of housing will be resolved. And now for Helga and her pet, this was the most important thing. The conversation with Alice did not bring any positive results. However, the owner of the salon chain promised, "Helga, you are in good standing with me. So as soon as I think about opening a point in that area, I already know who I'll invite to work there. But for now I need you here. I think there is no reason for you to leave me, since getting a new job is always problematic. You understand that I do not accept lateness. So please plan your route to work so as not to keep our visitors waiting." Fine. Olia had no choice but to agree. As a result, the woman's spring and summer were filled with numerous worries, which were mainly associated with the need to travel almost an hour one way from her temporary shelter to her place of work. It's good that thanks to Lily's friendliness and sincerity, Helga did not feel awkward. On the contrary, when the daughter-in-law and her sons, as promised, came to live in a private house, the woman became much happier. Frodo, who attracted boys like a magnet, was also not bored while his mistress was away. Denny and Lily were finally able to get a larger apartment with the help of government payments, and Helga happily tried to repay their relatives for their kind attitude. The woman, when she could, worked with her nephews, and also participated in the renovation process. Maybe it wasn't always easy to manage the active Max and Alex, who had just recently learned to walk and was diligently looking for a way to give himself a bruise, but there was finally no time to think about the unpleasant separation. Lily introduced Helga to neighbors whom she had known since her childhood, and she had a good relationship with almost everyone. As a result, the abandoned woman even gained a small clientele. Even though the part-time work was not too significant and was sometimes even expressed in natural products, it increased Helga's self-esteem. However, she did not always try to bend to what her neighbors told her when they came for manicures. The woman cared little about the opinions of those around her, who, seeing how the dog lived calmly in the house, Frodo was given a personal chair, and he, having a not at all evil disposition, limited himself to attentive observation of everything that was happening around him, said Ook. "Keep the dog in the house." The neighbor on the left, Jane, was indignant when she came in to get her nails in order. "Look, there's a booth in the yard. Put it on a chain, and that's it. It'll be more useful. Why are you feeding him in vain?" Helga was not offended by such talk. Frodo was her true friend, and it was useless to convince a fully grown lady of anything. In addition, the dog turned out to be an excellent companion for the boys, which means that it was necessary to take special care of its cleanliness, and all advice to place the dog on the street was completely ignored. Thanks to the increasing flow of acquaintances who decided to get a manicure from her, the abandoned woman realized that her skills were in demand, and she, especially given the support of her relatives, would not be lost. Helga tried not to remember or think about Andrew. She even began to succeed. Denny was happy for his sister, who now looked much better than on the day when, with eyes reddened from tears, she appeared on the threshold of his old family nest. Lily was also happy that the girl had finally learned to smile again. Closer to autumn, Lily and her children returned to a new apartment, where quite pleasant renovations had already been made. It was time for the eldest nephew to get ready for school and explore a new territory, the desk, where he had to learn his lessons. Lily asked straightforwardly, "What, Helga, are you staying, or will you move with us? Now there is enough space for everyone, and it will be closer to work. It's a shame to spend so much time on the road." Max intervened in the conversation between the adults and said, "There will definitely be enough for everyone, and you will help me with my homework, it's true." However, Helga refused the proposal from her relatives. "If possible, I will stay here. I really liked it here. And Frodo is better here." Denny, without insisting, still told his sister, "If you get bored or sad, just let us know. We will pick you and Frodo up immediately." Agreed? Helga hugged her family one by one and promised, "If anything happens, I'll definitely tell you." "Thank you." Whenever possible, Helga came to visit her brother when her help was needed, but she always finally refused the offer to move into an apartment, saying that she and the dog were much calmer in nature. The woman did not yet suspect that soon the calm period of her life would come to an unexpected end. Golden autumn flashed by. And then, obeying the eternal law of nature, Bright white snow fell to the ground and everything became gloomy. The frost has already firmly grabbed all the puddles and turned the off-road conditions on the roadway into miniature mountain ranges. Helga now had to wake up even earlier to get to work on time. But the slightly shifted regime did not bother her much. Life on the outskirts of the city seemed to come to a standstill as darkness fell. Sometimes, of course, there were noisy cars whizzing by and dogs doing roll call, but overall the area was quiet and calm. Helga liked everything here, and her pet clearly enjoyed this lifestyle. One night, Frodo suddenly began to behave strangely. He worriedly, which was something exceptional for him, touched the mistress's hand with his cold, wet nose, sliding his claws along the floor, running from the door to Helga's bed. Without waiting for dawn, the owner could not stand it and decided to take the pet out for a walk. The woman became worried what if the dog ate some kind of poison. So, we need to see how the dog behaves on the street. And sighing, Helga quickly pulled on her sweatpants and put her feet in her sneakers. Putting on her jacket, she thought that it was time to prepare winter shoes. There was hardly anything comfortable in the local store. This means that after work, you need to walk around the city's shopping centers and look for new clothes. In addition, it would be a good idea to visit construction stores and consider the option of insulating the veranda. If you approach the matter wisely, then you will get a good winter refrigerator. And in warmer seasons, the veranda can become an additional room. Of course, this idea had to be discussed with Lilia and her brother, but first we needed to at least roughly estimate how much it would cost to implement the bold idea. The dog stomped fussily at the threshold, distracting him from his thoughts, and Helga hurried to open the door. The miracle never happened. The snow never fell. The sky was overcast and quite dark. In the bright light of the lantern, the familiar courtyard looked unusual, and even somehow mysterious. Frodo immediately rushed to the apple tree that grew near the gate, and began to bark, and then whine softly. Approaching, Helga saw a package lying under a tree. It only took a split second to understand that someone had thrown a small child into the yard. The woman grabbed the bundle and hurried into the saving warmth of the house, mentally reproaching herself for not immediately taking the dog outside, which clearly sensed the foundling. In the room, Helga, who had gained experience in handling small children by helping her daughter-in-law care for Denny, unwrapped the blanket and realized that it was time to change the swaddle for the girl lying in front of her. It was very fortunate that Lily left some of her son's things in the house. Therefore, there were no problems getting the little one in order. But what to do now with such a find? Helga shook the blanket to hang it on the radiator, and a note printed on the printer suddenly fell out of the lining. "I'm scared to leave my daughter to the mercy of fate, but there is no other option. Believe me, I have a compelling, almost justifiable reason for doing what I do. Take care of my girl. Heaven bless my little one and you." Helga felt uneasy. It was all very strange. It seemed that the words were sincere, but this in no way connected in the woman's mind with the cruelty of the act. It turns out that the person who dropped the child off deliberately took a risk for the baby's health by leaving her on the street rather than dropping her off in some warmer place. What if Frodo had not asked to leave? Or if she hadn't released it? Lilia became scared. But it was necessary to act, and urgently, even if it was night outside. The woman wanted to warm the milk, but was afraid that the child might have an allergy, so she decided to call an ambulance, doctors, and the police. The dispatcher, we must give her credit, sent a team very quickly. The doctors examined the baby and shook their heads when they heard Helga's confused explanations that she had found the child and did not know what to do with him. The paramedic, a middle-aged woman, advised, "We, of course, can now take the baby to a children's hospital, but, to be honest, there are no special indications for this. The girl is about 6 to 7 months old, judging by her development and external condition. She lived in good conditions. She was clearly well looked after. And being in the frosty air did not have time to harm her. Your dog seemed to sense something was wrong almost immediately, and the girl didn't even get hypothermic, fortunately. If possible, wait for the police. Actually, I have no right to say this, but the later the child ends up in a government institution, the better, in my opinion, it will be. You can give your baby warm water from a spoon. If you have zucchini, cook it and puree it. Try to give a treat if suddenly the child begins to cough, sneeze, or any other symptoms appear. Do not engage in amateur activities and call the team. You never know what we missed during the inspection. All clear?" Helga nodded her head, thinking that it looked like she would have to take time off from work today to wait for the police, because bothering Lily and asking her to come was not an option. Not only does the daughter-in-law have to take Max to school in the morning, but she also has to drag Denny across the city. Having seen off the ambulance crew, Helga, under the attentive gaze of the dog, took the girl he had found in her arms and began to rock her. Once upon a time, a woman really wanted to give birth to a child for her beloved Andrew, but the implementation of the idea somehow kept getting postponed. Only now suddenly there was such a wave of tenderness towards a defenseless creature. However, the thought of keeping the child did not arise. As soon as the morning came into its own, the woman warned Alice that she would not be able to come to work, and after listening to the boss's grumbling, for the first time she seriously thought about leaving the salon. The policeman came when the clock was already approaching noon, and immediately began asking Helga about all the circumstances of the case. The woman openly explained that she discovered the child in time only thanks to Frodo. "It's good that he raised me. The baby could have frozen if it weren't for him. Doctors said she was completely healthy and was receiving good care." Fyodor, having studied the note, put it in a bag, patted the smart dog on his wide head, and then clarified. "Well, if the doctors said that everything is fine, then I'm sending your find to the baby home." Swallowing the lump that suddenly appeared in her throat, Helga answered in monosyllables. Yes. Deep down in her heart, she felt sorry for the girl. But the woman believed that at that moment she was doing the only right thing. Soon after the formalities were settled, representatives of the relevant police department appeared at the house, and the district police officer briefly explained to them what had happened. The found baby was taken away, thanking Helga for her concern, and the woman finally relaxed. Having treated Frodo to meat, she began to clean up the house, although it was not dirty. I just wanted to do something, and not sit, immersed in sad thoughts about the fate of the girl. However, it didn't take long to clean up. Jane came to visit, who, as it turned out a little later, was a good friend of Fedor's wife, and was already privy to the details of everything that happened at night and in the morning. The neighbor began to lament. Yesterday I spent the night with my daughter. And here on our street I missed such an event. As a friend told me that a foundling had been found, my heart almost stopped. What kind of mother could do such a thing, cuckoo? There are no other words. It's necessary to leave a child in the cold. Ugh. The woman, having spoken, reached into her bag, took out a package, and handed it to the surprised Helga, explaining, "I collected this for your hero." Looking at him, I scolded him and called him a parasite. And it turns out he saved the child. After sitting a little longer and discussing the details of the unusual incident several times, Jane got ready to go home, saying, "Now the times have come. It seems like everything is in bulk, and the children are thrown away like some kind of garbage. Being in an orphanage is like a punishment without guilt. No matter what anyone says, life there is not easy. I know it for myself." The woman fell silent and, brushing away uninvited tears, said goodbye to Helga and left. Frodo looked with an understanding look, as if he was looking into the depths of his owner's soul, and she admitted to the dog, "Imagine, I think I would like the girl you found to stay with us. Why, you get along great with children. And I'm already at such an age that it's high time to become a mother. You and I worked out our practice on children excellently, in my opinion. So they could definitely handle one girl." By chance, or perhaps truly understanding the mistress, Frodo winked, and the touched woman hugged her faithful dog. During an evening conversation, Helga told her daughter-in-law about the girl she had found and asked, "You seem to have mentioned once that one of your classmates is raising a foster child. Maybe you happen to know how the adoption procedure goes?" Lily, it turned out, was not too surprised by the question and promised to find out all the important nuances. The next day, Helga came to work and tried to act as if nothing unusual had happened the day before. However, my thoughts stubbornly returned to the found baby and everything connected with her. Helga did not understand what reason could be good enough to abandon a child on the street in the cold. And she was so immersed in her thoughts that, while working on the nails of one of the regular visitors, she incorrectly answered the questions asked and almost ruined the drawing. As luck would have it, the owner was in the salon that day, who noted the insecure work of the master and, after the client left, invited Helga to a conversation in her small office. "What kind of nonsense have you allowed yourself to eat? Yesterday I didn't go out at all, but today it's like you're holding instruments in your hands for the first time. I understand everything. There may be personal problems. We are all human. But when troubles begin to affect the quality of work, this is unacceptable. Nowadays, there is such competition among nail service professionals that there is simply no right to make mistakes and send visitors away not completely satisfied. So Helga, I want to get an honest answer from you to a direct question. Will you be able to cope with your emotions and work normally? Or should I look for another master at the salon? Helga had to briefly brief her boss on what had happened, and she unexpectedly softened her tone. Oh, well, I would have explained it right away. Helping a child is sacred. I thought it was a sin that you were walking. She doesn't seem like a frivolous person, but you never know what happens in life. But still, Helga, pull yourself together. You did everything you could, and you have nothing to reproach yourself with. Unexpectedly, Helga opened up. You know, I gave the girl to the specialists, it seems, but my heart is restless. I feel some kind of responsibility or something. The insightful Alice clarified. Aren't you going to adopt her? Keep in mind, this is not taking a dog or a kitten into the house. The hassle is many times greater. True, the return is incomparable, but you need to think about everything extremely seriously. I'll tell you in advance, so that there is no misunderstanding between us. I won't put you on maternity leave. You understand, this is not my practice. But at home, as far as I understand, things are slowly going well for you. Yes, I'll be sorry to part with you, but I won't keep my place for you. No offense, of course. There is constant turnover in salons. There is no escape from it. So maybe it will be possible to find a job for you with a break, but I won't make any promises. In general, your decision should be fully informed. There was a knock on the boss's office. Administrator Lena came in and apologized and said, Alice. There, the visitor arrived a little earlier than she had been booked in, and behaved rather nervously. I offered her coffee, but she insists that she get a manicure as soon as possible, as if she expected us to lay out the red carpet for her and greet her with applause. But suddenly they offered her food. Alice, dissatisfied and gloomily, besieged the administrator. Keep your thoughts about visitors to yourself, it will be better. Turning her head to Helga, the boss summed up the conversation. I think you understood what I said. Then go and work. Helga hurried to her workplace and got down to business that brought her both money and pleasure. She appreciated Alice's frankness, which gave a complete picture of the prospects in connection with the likely changes, and decided to really think through her idea of adopting the found girl in every detail. In the evening, Helga's brother's family came to visit Helga and her faithful Frodo. The joyful boys were busy with the dog, who was happy about the return of the children, whom he considered his charges, and tolerated all signs of attention from them. At this time, the adults were discussing the details of the incident. Denny, looking straight into his sister's eyes, asked, Helga, as I understand it, you regret that the girl ended up in a state-owned house and would like to adopt her. You've always had a kind heart, but don't you think this is too much? You, of course, have experience communicating with Max and Alex. But that doesn't mean anything. Who knows what problems the baby will have? Lily echoed her husband and provided valuable information. Adoption is not a simple procedure at all. The documents required are through the roof. When my friend read out the list, my hair stood on end. I briefly outlined the situation and realized that it was not in vain. A friend who passed through the bureaucratic cordon immediately explained that you have at least 3 complicating circumstances at once. First of all, you are not married. And although according to the law this is not a basis for refusing adoption, in reality it may be considered that this is not in favor of the child. Secondly, you want to adopt a specific girl. In general, it turns out that there is a waiting list for small, healthy children. It may well turn out that by the time you collect all the necessary information, the girl will already be in the family. Thirdly, although in fact this is the most important, you don't have the necessary space of your own, George, and the share in our apartment will most likely not be enough. Noticing that Helga was sad, Lily rushed to support her. If you are firmly ready to fight for the girl, then Denny and I consulted and decided that I could issue you a deed of gift for this house. Seeing that his sister was about to burst into tears with emotion, Denny hastened to defuse the situation. However, as an option, you can urgently find a groom without material and housing problems and quickly get married. So 2 out of 2 problems will be solved with one graceful act, at least formalizing the fake marriage. Helga smiled through her tears. Well, this is some kind of fantastic option. It seems to me that it is absurd to count on him. Lily agreed. It's easier to become the mistress of this house anyway. I would never dare to give it into the wrong hands, and so he will actually remain in the family. I think my aunt would be happy. Having officially received a complete list of documents required for adoption, Helga began to obtain all the necessary certificates. She learned the wisdom at the school of foster parents, ran to doctors to pass a medical examination, visited various offices, and took a reference from her boss and a certificate of income. In addition, at the prompting of Lily and a friend, Helga asked the policeman to write a petition with a brief history of the discovery of the child, and Fedor did not refuse. In addition, thanks to a good relationship with the wife of the district police officer, he, in some unknown way, contributed to the fact that Helga was allowed to visit the found girl in the baby's home. Communication with the baby, who was named Diane, became a real miracle for the woman. She held the girl in her arms and was touched. Emotions were reflected on the small face. Even when Diane frowned or began to grunt with displeasure, Helga admired the baby. The nannies were accustomed to visits from the woman, who brought things not only for her pet, but also for other children, and sometimes they allowed her to stay with the girl longer. Although many employees have experienced some burnout over the many years of work at the baby house, they could not help but be happy that Diane, it seems, will soon find her mother. Every time Helga met a neighbor on the street, she sincerely thanked her for her help and support and offered to give her, her daughter, and her granddaughter a free manicure. Jane, they waved it off. Come on, Helga. How can I stay on the sidelines when there is practically a struggle for a child right next to me? I cannot. Let the girl have a chance to quickly become your daughter. No one deserves to end up in an orphanage, and I will help in any way I can. Thank God I have lived in the world and understand people. Fedor is a normal guy. My wife told him what kind of person you were, and that was enough for him. In general, don't worry and don't make things up. We'll have to contact you, but not for free. The money will still be useful to you. Jane and everyone who was aware of the situation tried to support her. Denny and Lily brought children's clothes, which were too small for Max and Ilya, but were in almost perfect condition. The colors, of course, are not particularly girlish, but everything is good. And the Helga ska is very maneuverable and light. Helga did not know how to thank her brother, and especially her daughter-in-law, who provided her with housing and with a generous gesture turned her into a well-to-do lady. Now the inspectors had no chance to reproach the woman for not being able to provide her adopted daughter with decent living conditions. Having run around and collected a set of necessary documents, Helga, with a restless heart, went to the guardianship and trusteeship department. The woman sincerely spoke about her experiences about the found girl, and that contact had already been established between them. Diane is happy when she sees me, smiles, wanders with her eyes, follows me when I leave. And in general, from the first moment, when I took her in my arms on a frosty night, I had the feeling that Diane was my blood. I may not have given birth to her, but I feel a real kinship with her. However, the story did not touch the hearts of strict officials one bit. I don't think that your decision to adopt a child is serious. I understand that you are single now, but you might meet a man. And what then? What if he doesn't need your daughter? What decision will you make then? Will you hand her back like a boring toy and stay with a man? And years later, will you constantly reproach your daughter for not building your own feminine happiness because of her? I think you need to think again. It will be better for everyone. People who have experienced severe loss spend years mulling over the decision to adopt a child. And you just decided since you found it, then the girl should a priori belong to you. This is strange, don't you think? The woman still said something, but Helga, stunned by the refusal, no longer understood much of the meaning of her phrases. There was a noise in her head, and after awkwardly saying goodbye, she left the office because it was the turn of other applicants. As promised, Helga called Lily and told her about the negative result of her visit to the guardianship and trusteeship department. The daughter-in-law supported. My friend warned me that most likely I would have to go through a trial, but don't be afraid, this is normal practice. By the way, think again, maybe you were really excited? Try to deal with your desire without unnecessary emotions, because this is a very big responsibility. Helga said wearily. Yes, as much as I was thinking, I hardly sleep at night, almost without a break. I think around the clock whether I can give poor Diane the real motherly love and care she deserves. So far, my opinion is clear. She will definitely be better off in a family than in a government institution, where the staff most likely does not have enough time for such poor fellows. The employees there are good, but they can't give in to everyone. Well then, don't be sad. Let's use all our resources and victory will be ours. The conversation calmed Helga down quite a bit, and although she was afraid that insomnia would overcome her again that night, she fell asleep almost immediately after returning home and walking with Frodo. The woman even forgot about food. And it's good that the alarm clock on the smartphone was set in advance for the required time of getting up. However, this precaution was even unnecessary. The faithful dog, obeying some natural feeling, woke up the owner a few minutes before the nasty bell rang. Helga had to tell Alice about the failure, and the boss surprisingly provided her subordinate with moral support. I admit, I somehow admire your determination to fight for a girl you don't know. It's a pity that your running around the authorities has so far been without result. After all, as far as I understand, this means that the schedule will have to be rearranged again. Well, nothing. I think the girls will cooperate. I have plans to open a location in the area where you live, and as soon as all the formalities are ready, they will transfer you there. I warn you right away, the salary at first may be less than here, but I think there are prospects for improvement. Helga, inspired by the support of her boss, went to her workplace. A transfer to a new location could actually make her life much easier and save valuable time that she is currently spending on the road. However, for now it was necessary to act precisely in the circumstances that prevailed at the moment. Helga, whose income had noticeably decreased while running around various authorities, tried to save money, but still could not deny herself the pleasure of looking into the children's departments whenever possible to look for things for her future daughter. She had no doubt that, even through court, or even several court hearings, she would be able to achieve her goal. Once, in a special department located in a large shopping center, a woman, turning into an aisle with toys, almost collided head-on with her ex. Andrew was noticeably embarrassed and tried to hide his emotions behind a cheeky tone. "Hello, what fate are you? Are you picking up anything for your nephews? Or is there something I don't know about you?" The man, following his habit, smoothed his hair with his palm, and Helga noticed the sparkling rim of a brand new wedding ring on his finger. The meeting with her former roommate stirred resentment in Helga's soul, and she did not even try to answer him politely. "Why do you need to know anything about me?" With the hands of his sister, he threw me out of the apartment into which I, like some fool, invested money. And now one might think you are interested in something? Go somewhere your own way, and don't stand in my way. Andrew was taken aback. He did not expect such a rebuke from Helga, who, from her experience living together, was distinguished by meekness, tenderness, and a tendency to compromise. A man who married out of pure convenience and fell under the control of a strict wife has already regretted that he followed the lead of his family and entered into this profitable, but clearly unhappy marriage. The years spent with Helga now seemed to him the most golden time of his life. He would not mind restoring a relationship with her and receiving love and understanding from his former partner, although he was worried about how to do everything so that his legal wife would not know about the affair. Andrew understood that in this case the costs of marriage would most likely be in vain, but whoever doesn't take risks, as you know, doesn't drink champagne. Thinking quickly, the man tried to soften his impression. "Sorry, Helga. I still think that you are the best thing that has happened to me in this life. Please forgive me for hurting you. I was wrong, and I wish I could go back in time and do things differently. But unfortunately, no one has yet invented a time machine." Andrew joked, trying to evoke positive emotions in his ex. But Helga grimaced as if she had bitten off a slice of lemon and admitted, "Andrew, I was also mistaken. It was not worth wasting time on you and money on your apartment. These funds would be very useful to me now. But what can we do now? Just spit and move on with your life. Okay, no need to waste my time again. Goodbye." Andrew tried to tell Helga something else, but she hastily left the department, and he did not dare to follow her. However, it seemed to him that he still had a chance to get his modest mistress back. After thinking a little, the man deposited money on Olia's card in the amount of about 2 of her salaries, hoping that this would begin their dialogue. He imagined how the proud woman would return the amount to him, and then gradually they would begin to communicate. But Andrew miscalculated. Helga really needed the money. And having received a message about their receipts, she immediately rushed to hire a good lawyer to conduct the trial. Lily helped find the specialist, who in turn learned about him from her friend who had gone through this unpleasant process. Surprisingly, the amount received was definitely enough for the fee. Helga saw this as a very good sign and was not mistaken. The lawyer brilliantly defended the interests of her and the found baby. At the beginning of the summer, after almost 8 months of struggle for Diane, the girl was officially recognized as her daughter, and a completely new stage in their lives began. Alice, whose opening of a new salon was delayed, suggested that the employee go on paid leave for the first time. This, of course, is not a decree, but I think everything will be resolved successfully soon. You will be able to find a nanny for the girl while you work. Helga smiled happily. Thank you very much, Alice. I have so many helpers. Just a miracle. The daughter-in-law and the boys have arrived for the summer, and the neighbors are vying with each other to offer help. The stern boss smiled. Well, that's just wonderful. So, as soon as there is news, I will call you about the arrival of little Diane home. Helga organized a small celebration for the closest people who provided great support on the way to the goal. In addition to her brother and family, Jane and the district police officer along with her wife were invited. Those gathered tried not to make noise, and Max and George, in the company of their tailed friend, were almost constantly in the room where their new relative was quietly sleeping in the crib. Helga warmly thanked everyone who helped in her difficult task. Consider this a little belated gift, but what a gift. Now you have a daughter, and she has you. I wish you both good health, and so that you always understand each other and be happy. After a pleasant evening, Helga, her brother's family, and little Diane remained in the house. The smart dog lay down not in his favorite chair, but right next to the baby's crib. Max ran to the adults and showed them this touching picture. Look, Diane now has a personal nanny. Lily hugged her son tenderly. Frodo guarded you and your brother. And while talking with you, I realized how to treat children. It's quite normal that he took the baby under his wing. Such a smart dog is simply not capable of doing anything differently. With the advent of her adopted daughter, Helga seemed to have a second wind. Lily sometimes jokingly said, "Listen, it seems like you don't even need help. You get up before everyone else, have time to clean the house and take care of the boys and daughter. It's like I'm relaxing here at a resort." Although at the stage of collecting documents for adoption, people who knew about the situation tried to warn Helga and repeatedly tried to tell her that the girl may have hidden pathologies. The fears turned out to be unfounded. That's what the old paramedic said. The baby received excellent care right up until the moment she was thrown onto the street. The girl grew up and had practically no serious illnesses, so ordinary childhood ailments. And in terms of intelligence with age, she could give a head start not only to Ilya, but also to Max. The issue with work was also resolved perfectly. Alice managed to open a new salon, where she invited Helga to work. The journey from home to work and back now took very little time, and the woman was completely happy. One day Andrew called her, and in a trembling voice began to invite her on a romantic date. And Helga, listening to her former roommate, wondered how she could even fall in love with him. After saying goodbye and pressing end, she blocked the number that she once knew by heart and felt that she had now truly turned the page on the past completely. Even if Andrew turned out to be not entirely a scoundrel and transferred money for the repairs made, the woman still did not want to communicate with him. She had already spent part of her life on him and no longer wanted to give him even a few minutes. 5 years flew by unnoticed. Diane grew up smart and affectionate, refuting all doubts about bad heredity from the parents who abandoned her. Watching the girl reach for knowledge, Helga decided to enroll her daughter in preparatory courses at school. The meeting for parents had already passed, and the woman and Diane even managed to buy all the stationery that the teacher recommended. The first lesson was supposed to take place in a week. Changes were coming, but Helga still had no idea how large-scale they would be. In the meantime, we could enjoy the still warm evenings of the coming autumn. Twilight was in no hurry to drive away the daylight, and the woman, without fear, let her daughter walk in the yard in the company of Frodo. Helga had no doubt about the dog's prudence. And even if Diane had planned a dangerous prank, her faithful bodyguard would have prevented any trouble. One day, looking out the window, a woman saw her Diane talking with an unfamiliar man. The dog stood between the interlocutors, blocking the little mistress, but Helga's heart pinched unpleasantly. Anticipating danger, she hurriedly went down the steps of the stairs, stood next to the dog, the daughter of a stranger, and warily asked, "Good evening. Did you want something? Are you looking for someone?" The man, looking up from his careful examination of Diane, looked up at the woman, and, trying not to scare anyone, said hello, introduced himself and explained. "Good evening. I'm Justin. Have you heard of such an entrepreneur from the neighboring region?" Helga shook her head and the man continued. "Apparently I need to talk with you about the events of almost 6 years ago. It so happens that it seems that you have perfectly solved the problem that you acquired because of a person close to me. There can be no excuse for what happened in the past, and I am indebted to you forever." Helga's legs almost gave way. She realized that the man had a direct relationship with the girl whom she raised as her own daughter, and frantically wondered what to do and how not to scare the little girl with unexpected information. Unable to think of anything better, the woman asked Diane, "Daughter, take the apples and take them to your grandmother together with Frodo. Sit there and entertain her a little." Otherwise, she complained that her relatives had not come to visit for a long time. "Play something, and in the meantime, I'll talk to our guest. Don't rush home. I'll come for you myself." The girl looked sternly at the man and asked with narrowed eyes, "And you won't offend my mother?" Justin put his hand to his heart and promised, "I won't offend you for anything." Diane hesitated for a few seconds, and then turned to the dog. "Frodo, let's go to Grandma. I'll just carry the apples, otherwise I know you. You won't be able to carry half of them." The dog, who adored his owner, only waved his tail in response. Helga watched Diane and dog go out the gate and invited an unexpected visitor. "Why are we standing on the street? Let's at least go to the veranda. Otherwise I feel the conversation will be long." There was a table and chairs on Helga's veranda, and the woman suggested, "Sit down and tell me. Otherwise my nerves are already on edge." The man did not refuse the offer, and sitting on a chair, told a story that made Helga feel uncomfortable. "In the past, my family and I lived in a neighboring state, 300 kilometers from your town. My wife, Margaret, gave birth to my daughter, Dorothy. Beautiful, healthy. I tried to make life easier for the woman I love. We also had an au pair. She did the cleaning and cooking. More precisely, she was an old friend of my mother and practically part of our family. This woman raised me and treated me, if not like a son, then like an adored nephew. Aunt Isabel and Margaret received her very warmly, and she really doted on her daughter. Everything was great. Both the house and the business are well promoted, and with prospects for development right up to the capital. In general, I was so successful that my competitors decided to destroy me, not physically. No, not at all. On the other hand, they approached him in order to hit him harder. They wanted to trample him mentally. And for me, this was worse than death. As I found out completely after the fact, a person was hired who studied all the information about my wife, found an approach to her, and then began a secret affair with her. It's probably a banal story. But being in this whole situation is so disgusting that all the comedy is not even felt. I would almost not blame my wife for her affair, if not for the sad consequences. One day I received photographs by email in which my wife and a man I didn't know were having fun. At first I just wanted to break her neck, but I pulled myself together to do the irreparable and instructed a good friend to check if the pictures were real. You never know, maybe it's editing. But the timid hope was dashed by reality. Margaret did have some fun on the side. Moreover, the pictures were definitely fresh, because they showed a tattoo that she had done quite recently. Of course, it's also my fault that my wife fell for it and cheated on me. I was always missing at work. One issue urgently needed to be resolved, then another. Of course, Aunt Isabel took care of the household chores, but it was my support that Margaret needed. It was this thirst for warmth and participation that this scoundrel caught her. I don't know how I was able to survive the betrayal then. I spoke harshly to Margaret, but within the law, without assault. She cried, promised that she would break off the connection, which jeopardized our marriage. I loved her very much then and decided to give her another chance, without even realizing that this would be a huge mistake. About a week after Margaret and I had an unpleasant conversation, and we seemed to agree to try to save our marriage, she disappeared along with her daughter. Aunt Isabel's wife told her that she needed to go to the children's clinic for a scheduled appointment, and she left home. This has happened before. Therefore, there was no reason not to release them. When Margaret and Dorothy did not return for dinner, Aunt Isabel became worried and began calling my wife to find out if it would make sense to reheat the food. But the phone was unreachable. Even then, there was no alarm. Aunt Isabel told me that Margaret and her daughter seemed to be late at the clinic, where appointments are usually on time and there should be no queues. And she asked to go there, saying that her heart was not in the right place. I rushed and found out that Margaret and her daughter had not appeared there at all. That's when I got worried. While driving along the route to the house, I was looking through my email and, having opened a letter demanding money and naturally a ban on contacting law enforcement agencies, I almost got into an accident by sharply slamming on the brakes. I did not officially contact the police. I was very afraid that I was being watched or wiretapped. And as best I could, I calmly drove to the house, and through Aunt Yu, whom I sent away from the house, fearing the wiretapping, I contacted a good friend so that he could help unofficially investigate the disappearance of his wife and daughter. He advised me to agree to all demands, and I did everything exactly according to the instructions of the criminals, and began to wait for news. I believed that I could make up for this money. But terrible information came. The police department called me and informed me that they had found Margaret's burnt-out car. There were 2 bodies inside, an adult woman and a baby. An examination followed. It was established that both lasting bodies belonged to my own girls. Aunt Isabel had a heart attack, and as a result, almost on the same day, 3 people, without whom I could not imagine my existence, ended up in their graves. I then began to get drunk almost every day, and some kind of supernatural anger helped me not to completely slide to the very bottom. I wanted to find the people responsible for the deaths of Margaret, Dorothy, and Aunt Isabel. But it was no use. The man seemed to have disappeared. My ill-wishers seemed to calm down. They even expressed sympathy. But running the business became completely uninteresting to me, and I sold it. Almost for next to nothing. You could say that he gave most of the money to charity, and he gradually began to learn to move on with his life. Justin fell silent, and Helga became perplexed. If the examination found that his wife and daughter died, it turns out that Diane cannot be involved in this tragic story. Why then did the man come to them? Was the expert mistaken, and the visitor buried someone else instead of his wife and daughter? The man seemed to have considered these unvoiced questions in Helga's eyes, because he spoke again and startled the woman with his confession. You seem to have already guessed that the girl you are raising is my daughter. Helga involuntarily began to shake her head, unable to say anything. And Justin, realizing that it was difficult for a woman to accept such news, gently began to tell him further. With difficulty, with the support of my parents, who themselves could barely hold on after the news of the death, but I stopped drinking. Although he changed his field of activity, he went back to business. What else did I have left? I didn't want to upset my parents, so as not to lose them. This is how I spent these endlessly long years, stretching from the moment I last saw my wife and daughter. I never became close to a single woman, fearing betrayal. And 2 days ago, returning from work, I saw a female figure at the gate of the house. I was surprised after all. Strangers usually don't wander around our ranch. I thought that maybe one of the neighbors' housekeepers or nannies needed something. He drove up and got out of the car. I come closer, and it's Margaret herself standing in front of the gate. She was emaciated. There were bruises under her eyes covering half her face. But undoubtedly my wife appeared before me, swaying. Of course, I was afraid for my own mind, suspecting that I had gone crazy. I went to visit my wife and daughter at the cemetery, and then suddenly there was such a turn. Margaret fell to her knees in front of me and began to beg for conversion, but I had no time for these sentiments. What worried me more was not even the fact that under the name of my wife, some other woman had found her last refuge in the churchyard. The most important thing for me was to find out why Margaret returned alone and where my daughter went. I dragged my wife into the house and began asking questions. And the more she talked, the worse I felt. It turns out that on the day of her disappearance, Margaret went to meet her lover, but not for fun. The man decided to get money from my wife using a video that he shot secretly and promised to post on all available networks in order to disgrace her, and at the same time undermine my business reputation. How Margaret cried when she said that she decided to take Dorothy with her, so that after meeting her lover she could drop into the clinic. The scoundrel decided to up the ante and said plans had changed. The money that Margaret brought was not enough for him. He demanded that she live in one of the houses as a living toy. Neither tears, nor pleas, nor promises of money could bribe this cynic. The only thing my wife could agree on was to save her daughter. So that the baby could not be recognized, she was changed, and her lover allowed Margaret's note to be printed on a printer, but not written by hand. Moreover, he strictly warned that if the text contains a hint of the name of the girl or her parents, then Dorothy will not survive. Laughing, he said that he would not feel sorry for the child. Frightened Margaret, of course, agreed to everything. She, naive, thought that I would certainly look for my daughter, and I didn't know that a lot of people were involved in this, and that false cases had already been prepared and the expertise was bought on the vine. Margaret was in some country hotel, and she was entertaining the crowd. And a week ago I managed to escape and get home. She may be exhausted with obvious health problems, but she accomplished the almost impossible and gave me hope. After listening to my wife's story, I realized that our daughter might be alive. We had to bring heaven to earth, but we managed to find the bribed expert and even get on the trail of the found little girl, about the same age as our Dorothy. It's good that Margaret roughly figured out how long they had been traveling before Dorothy was taken from her. It's just a miracle that you haven't moved anywhere. Otherwise, the search would have been delayed. It will probably be difficult for the girl to accept the truth, but Margaret and I are her parents. In fairness, it is we who must educate and raise her. We, of course, want to offer you compensation. We'll pay you any amount you name. Helga felt bad. Only in her worst dreams people came to her and tried to take Diane away. A woman would jump up screaming from such visions, invariably frightening the sensitive Frodo, and sometimes even her adopted daughter, who was generally known to sleep soundly. And now the nightmare is happening in reality, and it's impossible to wake up. The silence that settled on the veranda dragged on, and then Helga went on a tirade. Do you want to know what compensation will suit me? I'll tell you simply, leave me and my daughter Diane alone. I don't need anything more from you. Let me raise my daughter in peace, and don't dare interfere in our lives. A baby is not a toy. And for that matter, your wife has no excuse. Why the hell did she go there with her little daughter? It was clear that she was going towards the criminal. Again, this man of hers could easily do anything to the girl, and how would your thick-headed wife control him? Oh, he allowed her to print the letter. What a benefactor. Do you know that your daughter was planted under that apple tree for me? Frosty night. Did you see the dog that stood in front of your daughter? It was he who sensed that someone had appeared in the yard. If it weren't for him, it's scary to even think what would have happened to the baby. She was essentially left to the mercy of fate. Will it freeze or not? Do you think I'll give you my daughter so calmly? What for? No, I will fight and will definitely win. We are used to exchanging everything for money. Everything is for sale. Do you think you just need to name the price and you can calmly ruin fate? Who do you think you are? Helga took a breath and realized that businessmen have much more opportunities. She was frightened by the prospect of being left without a daughter and began to convince the man. You are an adult, and you understand that it will be difficult for a girl to change something in life. How can I explain to her that she will now have two mothers? Diane grew up in my arms. She's used to me and loves me. Can you imagine how much harm this unexpected news could cause her? Please, let's leave everything as it is. I tell you, Helga, no need to shock Diane. Please, if your daughter is dear to you, spare her. Don't ruin her fate. Of course you are running a business, and they are better off financially apparently. But is it just about money? Justin wanted to object, but at that moment his phone rang so loudly that Helga even flinched from the ringing. She saw how the man turned pale, almost silently listening to his interlocutor, and guessed that the complicated tragic story had received an unexpected continuation. At the end of the conversation, Justin roared. So you were completely powerless? Is this what you want to tell me? The voice from the receiver monotonously explained something, and Helga could hear the words. We sympathize. Sorry, we did everything we could. The woman realized that something irreparable had happened, and Justin, who ended the conversation, confirmed her assumption. Margaret died. This time there can be no mistake. I put her in the hospital with a doctor I knew so that they could treat her, at least give her some vitamins, and she, after being there for a while, just went out the window. Doctors tried to save Margaret, but her body was too exhausted. She was given anesthesia. She just fell asleep. Her heart stopped beating. Justin looked confused, and compassionate Helga brought him water and a sedative from her personal supplies. Here, take this medicine, you will feel better. The man thanked him in confusion and got up to leave. However, before reaching the door a few steps, he turned to Helga and asked, "Let's postpone the continuation of this conversation. I will arrive in 4 days, having previously agreed on a time convenient for you, and then we will decide what to do." Helga looked after Justin, and only when he got into the car parked at the beginning of the street, she hurried to her neighbor to get Diane, whom, it turns out, her parents called Dorothy. Frodo noticed the mistress in advance and opened the unlocked door for her. And Jane, who was happily playing checkers with the girl, immediately noticed that Olia had no face. After waiting for Diane to leave, Jane asked in a whisper, "What kind of guy came to see you? Ex yours or what? I really wanted to call Fyodor so that he would look at you by chance." Helga, who herself still couldn't believe the sudden turn of fate, did not tell her neighbor anything, limiting herself to gratitude for helping to keep the girl occupied and a promise. "I'll tell you everything later, but now we'll go. I'm kind of tired today." On the way home, Helga squeezed Diane's hand so tightly that she even playfully asked, "Mom, are you afraid that, like ours, one day I'll take a balloon and fly away?" The woman almost burst into tears, but tried not to let the girl notice her depressed mood. "Sorry, Diane, I was just lost in thought." Helga spent the whole night without sleep. She looked on the internet for all the information she could find about Justin, and was surprised that practically no sharply negative statements were published about him. Most of the articles were, of course, devoted to the misfortune that happened to his wife and daughter. Helga looked closely at the posted photos, but from the small images, and even in poor resolution, it was almost impossible to make out whether Diane or another child was in them. In the morning, after taking her daughter to kindergarten, the woman rushed to visit her daughter-in-law, warning her at work that she would be late for an hour. Lily, after listening to her, was silent for a long time, and then supported her relative. "Diane is officially your daughter. Perhaps her father can go to court. But it seems to me it is better to try to resolve the matter peacefully," Helga admitted. "Lily, I'm incredibly scared. Maybe I should just drop everything, take Diane and go somewhere, so that her father will never find us?" The daughter-in-law nipped the idea of running away in the bud, without even hearing to the end what country Helga had decided to leave for. "In my opinion, doing this will only complicate everything. You say that this Justin will come to you in 4 days. This means it will be approximately Saturday. So that's great. Denny and I are also present at this meeting. And it would also be a good idea to invite the lawyer who helped Diane win the case." When Justin called Helga and they agreed on a time to meet, the woman realized that there was nowhere to retreat. The businessman, to the surprise of the woman, her brother, daughter-in-law, and lawyer, arrived alone for the fateful negotiations. He had several large packages in his hands. Having met and shook hands with the men, Justin explained the contents of his burden. "These are all gifts for my daughter." After everyone was settled, the businessman began negotiations that were more difficult than he had ever conducted. "Helga, I am immensely grateful to you for preventing Dorothy, let me call her that, from staying in a government institution for a long time. I am ashamed that I believed in the results of the examination and did not double-check them. After all, having done this, the search for my daughter would not have been stopped, and we would have met with her much earlier. I've been thinking all these days, and he made a difficult decision. Let's not shock the girl. You, Helga, were absolutely right when you said that the truth would only bring her suffering. Let everything remain as it is. I have only one request. Under any pretext, allow me to come and visit my daughter. I won't bother you often, but at least on weekends. Let's go somewhere together." The lawyer, realizing that his services would not be needed, hurried to leave, and Justin, Denny, Helga, and Lily sat, thinking a little more about how to introduce Diane to her father. As a man who cares about the beauty of his nails and comes in for a manicure, or as a colleague, Lily came up with a brilliant idea. "Oh, what's there to invent? Justin, come as a fan. Then gifts for Diane would be appropriate." Everyone agreed on this option. And Lily's idea turned out to be very promising. In the process of communication, sincere sympathy arose between Helga and Justin. A year after they met, which began with extreme stress, they got married, and the man legally became the father of his own daughter. A little later, he resolved all the issues in his hometown and moved to Ole and Diane to always be close to those he loves.